Right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this, the England's Economic Heartland's 4th Annual Conference, connecting people, transforming journeys. Last year we were in Hertfordshire University, and before that we've had a couple of sessions at Silverstone Circuit, and today we are at a virtual gathering, which is fantastic. My name is Anthony Oliver, and I've once again been asked to moderate today's session. I expect that over the next 4 hours or so, you're going to hear some really fantastic sets of presentations, some really excellent discussions, and they're all designed to help you understand the opportunities that England's Economic Heartland Development Project really brings across the whole supply chain. A bit of housekeeping first. We've split the morning into 6 themes, and I hope that you can stay with us for each of those. If you need to nip off at any moment, then do, but try and avoid it, because we want to have you here for the whole session. If you look at the handout section of the control panel, you'll find the agenda and all the information that you need about who the speakers are, etc. So you look down it's probably down the right-hand side of your screen, handouts. There's 2 documents in there. Have a look in there. Lots of really useful information. Also, in that section there, you'll find a section which is called questions, and I will have, as usual, lots of really fantastic questions to put to all of our presenters and our panels, but I'm very well aware that yours are normally much better. So I want you to send them in. I want you to just type away into that question box and let us know what you want to put the speakers on the spot about. Don't hold back, keep them short, keep them to the point, and we will get to those throughout the day. So time is short. We need to finish by 1 o'clock. We've got a lot to get through. Virtual meetings typically run very, very on time, so let's not change that. Let me now hand over to Mayor Dave Hodgson. Dave is elected Mayor of Bedford and chair of the Heartland's Strategic Transport Forum, and he's going to give you a quick overview and make a quick introduction to our guest speaker. Mayor Dave, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and welcome to this 4th annual conference and the first virtual one. It's a pleasure to be here, and a particular pleasure to invite our Minister to speak, Minister for Transport, Baroness Veer. I'm very pleased you've managed to find the time to address us at short notice at the beginning of the conference. So I'm going to hand straight over to Baroness Veer, Minister at Department of Transport. Baroness Veer.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dave, and it's a pleasure to be here. And no, Dave's actually right. It was massively short notice, and so clearly I'm not important enough to get the first round of invitations. But I'm hopefully that next time you have a conference, you will invite me, giving me a little bit more time in the diary, and then we can do a Q&A session and talk about things in more detail. But really, I just wanted to have the opportunity to speak to you today, to sort of bring you up to date as to where we are, and talk about all the good things that you're doing in your region, and the things that we want you to do in the future. So, I mean, clearly the COVID-19 pandemic has completely changed the way that we connect, and it's demonstrated our resilience, and of course you have all done a fantastic job in keeping people and freight moving, and that's been really critical in these difficult times. And of course we don't know what the long-term consequences are going to be of the coronavirus. So I think one of the things that we're all going to have to do is think about, when we're planning for the future, we've got to think flexibly, as well as thinking about growth and the way that we think growth is going to happen. But we need to be flexibly. And I also like to reassure you that I recognise the role that subnational transport bodies play in supporting this economic growth and improving quality of life and lowering emissions in England. We are quite focused on subnational transport bodies at the moment, because to me it's really, really important that every part of the country has somebody, has an organisation that looks on a pan-regional basis and helps us to plan the transport needs within your regions. Without you, actually, it's really difficult to do, and so therefore very much looking forward to working with you to sort of agreeing that we have a framework with which these subnational transport bodies will actually work, because we're looking to you. We want your leadership and we want your strategic oversight, so that we can put that back into our system and get the transport options on the table that you want to get on the table, rather than the stuff we think you might need, because that to me is the wrong way around. And so the second thing, and of course, you know, within all of these things, there are always difficult decisions to be taken, and to a certain extent, that's what we want you to do as well, because you will have different competing priorities within your region. You'll have some people who want X, some people who want Y. Well, you've got to try and decide for yourselves, because that is what local accountability and local decision making is all about. And then we can talk, you know, as a department as to how we fund your priorities and you know, get them moving. So, you know, for example, over the last what, probably 12 months or so, maybe a bit longer than that, 18 months, you know, the STBs did a fantastic job in helping us to understand the investment in the major road network. So we've got a pot of money. It's a 5-year pot, so we know it's there. And really getting your priorities into the major road network schemes was really, really helpful for us to understand what you wanted to deliver for your communities. And you know, the other thing that you will have heard the department focusing on at the moment is speed. Sometimes it feels like transport projects take forever, and we absolutely agree. So there's a couple of initiatives going on within government, and within the Department for Transport, we've launched the Acceleration Unit. And these are a small group of people. They're going to be sitting right at the heart of the department. Actually, they're going to be sitting bang in between all the ministers' offices. We're moving downstairs very shortly. So we will be able to see them. They will be able to see us. We will be able to talk about how do we get projects sped up. So to the extent that you've got any thoughts about that, be really happy to hear from you about that. Issues that you find locally, it's like, oh, this took probably 6 months too long. What can we do? Because actually, usually it's not the Department for Transport that's the problem, obviously. It's other parts of government that we have to collaborate with in order to make sure that we get projects through. So that might be DEFRA on environmental stuff, it might be MHCLG on planning, all of those things really important. So if you've got any thoughts on that, very, very happy to hear from you, because we know that it can be done, because obviously the A14 is often cited as one that was on time. No, it was early. It was early and on budget, so we can do it. So just finally, can I just thank you for all the work that's been going on so far on the draft transport strategy? Absolutely fantastic. I know that you're still working on it, and I very much look forward to seeing it in its next iteration. It's bold, it's ambitious, it's innovative. Those are all the things that we want regions to be. So you're doing a fantastic job. I will be working obviously very closely with Mayor Dave and also Councillor Martin Tett as we go forward, but I hope you have a great day.
Minister, thank you very much for opening us up in the conference that way. Certainly, it's great to hear that there is huge amounts of support going into transport. Difficult times, very challenging times, and as you say, lots of very difficult decisions. I'm going to hand back to Mayor Dave now to say, well, you know, give us your reactions. That how does that sound? You're talking about thinking flexibly, really, you know, helping you to take difficult decisions. Are you reassured?
I think so. I just want to thank the Minister for coming to talk to us today and offering some challenges there to see if we can all get the transport systems, the infrastructure that we all want to work quicker. I'd just like to move on, if I may, Anthony, to just welcome everybody to this first virtual annual conference. Last year, as you just said, we met at the University of Hertfordshire and we for the launch of the outline transport strategy, and obviously, as the Minister said, and as we all know, a lot has happened since then. And while it's disappointing not to meet in person, I'm really pleased that many more people have been able to attend than would have been possible with a physical conference. I'm delighted with the quality and variety of speakers. You talked about the 6 sessions, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them and thank them in advance for all their contributions. Today is about celebrating the strengths which exist in the region and how we harness these to overcome the challenges we face, how we transform journeys and better connect people in a changing world. It's about understanding the perspective of different stakeholders and how we can join together to create a clear and forward-thinking strategy for the region's strategic infrastructure and services. But we also have our challenges, including transport networks which operate close to or above capacity, carbon emissions which are higher than the national average. We have a significant rural population and dependence on the car is high. England's economic heartland represents the commitment by political and business leaders in the region to work together to turn these challenges into new opportunities, bringing prosperity to our residents, supporting sustainable growth, and realising their potential for this unique region. In July, we achieved a major milestone with the launch of our draft transport strategy, aimed at enabling the region's transport systems to underpin a green recovery from COVID-19 and to support a sustainable economic growth. The strategy looks to use the decarbonisation of our transport system as an opportunity to harness innovation and deliver solutions which in themselves support economic growth. Secondly, to champion investment in digital infrastructure as a means of improving connectivity, particularly within our rural communities, in order to actually reduce travel. Thirdly, to use the delivery of East West Rail as a catalyst for transformation of our strategic public transport network. To champion increased investment in active travel solutions that improve local connectivity. And finally, to ensure that our communities and businesses are supported by freight and logistics services whilst lowering the environmental impact. The strategy includes an investment pipeline of initiatives which should be taken forward to achieve the world-class transport system required to realise and support a world-class economic region. Just like successful businesses require investment to avoid going backwards, so does the Heartland. As leaders, we are committed to realising the potential of the region, but this requires confidence in projects being delivered in full and on time. And we're committed to working with government and other partners to bring confidence to investors, accelerate delivery, and to get things done. Responses to the transport strategy consultation so far have been very encouraging, whilst also raising a number of important issues for consideration for the final transport strategy to be published in 2021. Now, today's conference allows our speakers and delegates to explore how that is to be done. We will hear from a diversity of perspectives, from young professionals to business leaders and innovators through to environmentalists. I'd encourage everyone attending today's conference to take part in that consultation and shape the final strategy. A survey and more information is available on the EEH website. Consultation closes on midnight, not a minute past, on the 6th of October. Welcome to the conference and enjoy the day.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor Dave. That certainly sets the tone, and it's good to hear that after just a couple of presentations, the questions already flooding in, which is great, which sounds like a lot of great interaction going on there. Keep that up. We've heard the national political perspective, so let's get the local political perspective as well. I suppose the UK government may be somewhat distracted right now with COVID-19 and Brexit, but clearly programs such as England's Economic Heartland represent critical investment vehicles to really drive local and national economy. Let me introduce our next speaker, Greg Smith, MP. Is the MP for Buckingham and a member of the Transport Select Committee. And Greg, I think you can help us today to understand what the Heartland really means to government plans going forward. So, Greg, welcome.
Oh, good morning. Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, Mayor Dave, and everybody watching. It's great to take part in this, your 4th annual conference, and I hope you'll be back at Silverstone, which is half in my constituency in a future year. It's a fantastic venue for everyone to come to, and indeed surrounded by Silverstone Park, one of the major economic growth hubs, one of our enterprise zones in Buckinghamshire, where high-tech jobs are being created, and those high-tech jobs, people have got to get to work, and we need the transport solutions to get them to work in what is actually a very rural area, as most of the Heartland is. And I think the key here is indeed the joined up thinking across county boundaries to ensure that those solutions are in place. But as Baroness Veer said earlier, no one can get away from the fact that COVID has happened and that we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, and that has had a marked impact on the way people travel, whether people travel at all, across the whole area, across the whole country. I look at my own morning commute. I come into Westminster every day from Buckinghamshire. Pre-lockdown, the Chiltern line was crowded every day. Now it's me and 1 or 2 others per carriage on those rush hour trains. So people still aren't traveling. And that is clearly going to have a big impact on the future of rail travel, the future of commuting, puts a big question mark over what the Williams review is going to say, given that passenger numbers are so wildly different to when all of these pieces of work were started. And we don't know what passenger numbers will look like in 3 months, 6 months, next year, 6 years, whatever it might be. However, I think we do have to work on the presumption that normal will return. And whilst there will undoubtedly be an increase in home working, in people perhaps not working 5 days a week in the office but a more limited number of days, and that brings with it the digital challenges, the broadband challenges that many rural areas across the heartland will be impacted by, we also need to plan to encourage people to get back to the office, to get back to school, to get back to the places that they go for fun and for leisure as well. And that is going to need joined up transport. And so that's why I still continue to support the building of East-West Rail, for example. I think East-West Rail is going to be an absolute game changer in terms of East-West connectivity on rail. I think, as I've said before when I spoke at the launch of the transport strategy, I am not a supporter of the expressway. I think that is a road we simply do not need, and we would be much more sensible improving existing local roads and looking at things like local bypasses around villages that really do need them to keep traffic moving rather than clogging up traffic through villages. But what is essentially a new motorway through Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire and beyond is simply not something that has local support in my constituency or for which the economic case stacks up. And on that point of road travel, I am very much someone in the place that says the car isn't going to go away. There is still going to be a massive place and role for private car usage. Obviously, technology is moving on apace. Battery electric is becoming much more affordable, much more available to people. But across both road and rail, and to be honest, if we look beyond that, shipping and big vehicles, agricultural vehicles, etc., I think we actually do need to be investing as much in hydrogen as we do battery electric, because it does worry me from quite considerably that the race for all electric might actually be creating the next big environmental disaster in 20 or 30 years. And much as we all thought diesel was the way to go in the noughties, when it comes to disposing of all of this lithium ion, when it comes to disposing of battery electric vehicles in 10 years, I'm really worried to ensure that that isn't the next big environmental disaster. So I'm a big supporter in investment in hydrogen as well. The last point I'd make, just so that we can get on and become a little bit more interactive and take a few questions, is I think the active travel agenda is very important. And actually that, for my constituency, is somewhere where joined up thinking across county borders is really, really important. Let me give you an example of the proposals for a cycleway between Thame in Oxfordshire and Haddenham in my constituency. Haddenham and Thame Parkway Station is not in Thame, it's in Haddenham, in the middle of Buckinghamshire. There was a proposal for a cycleway between the town of Thame and that station. Buckinghamshire Council continues to support it. Oxfordshire County Council appear to have, for their own reasons, gone a little bit cold on it. Now, Bucks could build the thing up to the county border, but that would be dropping cyclists out into a main road as they cross the county line. So I think this is a real example where if we're serious about active travel, a lot of people do leave county boundaries. They don't recognise county boundaries within their commute, and we need to be much better at working across council areas to make these schemes happen.
I'm muted again. Thank you very much, Greg. That's a great start to the conference there, and certainly has generated quite a lot of questions, particularly around the issue of your reiteration of the expression of no need for the expressway. I mean, is that something which just going back to certainly a couple of questions? What are you hearing on the streets, on the doorsteps about the expressway, Greg?
It's universally, it's difficult in my constituency for anything to be less popular than HS2, and the expressway is less popular than HS2 because there's multiple reasons for it. Nobody denies that east-west road links across Buckinghamshire could be better. Of course they could. But the concept of building a whole new motorway through swathes of Buckinghamshire countryside that would have a massive impact on people's businesses, people's farms, the very fabric of current villages, people simply don't accept that we need that. And there's a whole economic and environmental case against it. And what I prefer is looking at our existing roads, not just in Buckinghamshire, but Oxfordshire and through Milton Keynes and into Bedfordshire and onto Cambridgeshire too, although I accept the Bedfordshire-Cambridgeshire bit is basically built already with the work that has gone on there in recent years. To improve our existing roads, and as I said in my earlier remarks, to look at, for example, the village of Wing, to get traffic moving through Buckinghamshire. Actually, the village of Wing takes an enormous amount of traffic, north-south, people going Aylesbury, Leighton Buzzard, up to Milton Keynes, and that does slow journey times down considerably. We would be much better, rather than building a new motorway, looking at where we can build, with local residents' consent, those bypasses that will keep traffic moving. Now, I'm pretty confident the expressway isn't going to happen. Highways England haven't lifted a finger on it since the election, since the general election. It is officially paused. The RIS2 document, where virtually every road building project in the country was given the green light, did not give the green light to the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway. And I continue on behalf of my constituents doing everything I can to get that formal cancellation notice from the government so that we can get on and do things that will help, that will get traffic moving, but that doesn't devastate our countryside.
Can I just come in there, Anthony?
Yeah, certainly.
It hasn't helped that Department of Transport or Highways England have named two different road projects the same thing. Greg did allude to the section to the east, so Black Cat roundabout in the A1M across to Caxton Gibbet, which is an upgrade, and that's called the Expressway. And so people in Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire see that. That is a project that hasn't been cancelled, and that upgrade of the road to continue for the link between the M1 and the A1 continues. And I hope your support will fully understand about the western section. But when we say cancellation of the expressway, to people in Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire, that means the road that has got DFT approval and is going forward to outline business case, that doesn't have the opposition, that's got political and public support for that, unlike the western section. So I think we've always got to remember, unhelpfully, they've called two projects the same thing. So the eastern section has support, and we'd like to go forward. The western section fully understand the lack of support and the lack of demand for it. There are maybe some more fundamental transport road systems that need doing before we even think about that. But I understand Greg's point and agree with Greg's point.
Okay, look, we've got 10 minutes or so for some
Oxfordshire, the Milton Keynes bit, that's the controversial bit.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes or so for some questions in a panel. Let me introduce Naomi's arrived. Naomi Green, head of England's Economic Heartland's head of technical program, who's going to join us for the panel session. Welcome, Naomi. Sorry to keep you waiting there. You entered the panel session. I'm going to kick off. I'm going to come straight to you just to bring you in, Naomi. We heard both the minister and Greg and Mayor Davis also referred to the fact that COVID has put huge pressure on central and local government and certainly changed the dynamic. I mean, what do you see the impact that's having on the Heartland's plans going forward and its development aspirations? Do you see that you are actually having to sort of remap them all?
I think from a transport perspective, we can see that there are things that we need to do in the short term to ensure the long-term future of public transport particularly, and to work with the government to make sure that our bus operators and train operators are able to ride the pressure that's coming at the moment on them. But in the long term, there are opportunities as well as risks with the changed travel behaviours that are coming from COVID. Our transport strategy sets out an ambition for a reduction in single car journeys, single passenger car journeys, that we need to have in order to achieve some of the decarbonisation commitments that we have in the transport strategy and our legal requirements as a country. Change travel behaviour as a result of people working differently could go a long way towards achieving those ambitions of reduced single-use vehicle journeys, enabling space to be freed up for people that have to use it, and particularly freight as well. And so those opportunities are real opportunities. In terms of the region as a whole, as we look at a green recovery, the Heartland region is absolutely primed to support this country coming out of some of the difficulties. We've got a very high, as you know, as our audience will know, high proportion of science and innovation in the region. We're ready to continue growing and continue supporting the economy. And therefore, in regions like ours, we need to keep growing in able to support the rest, the country as a whole, achieve its return to economic recovery.
There's a question here from Tom Greenwood, who says, during the lockdown, many parts of the UK have seen a huge increase in walking and cycling. Now we seem to be going back to old habits and driving everywhere again. Do you think we've missed an opportunity to finally prioritise active local travel? I mean, Naomi, and then Greg, you mentioned the need to really kind of focus on the active travel agenda. Naomi, very rapidly, have we missed the opportunity?
Well, I think actually the government has put a huge amount of money into walking and cycling during the summer. I appreciate there are complexities with delivering some of the ambitions of that investment, but certainly the ambition is there. It's about individuals being able to prioritise walking and cycling as part of their daily lives, and also putting the infrastructure where it is needed, as Greg raised. The transport strategy puts a really firm emphasis on walking and cycling. We support, and we'll hear later this morning from Sustrans on the Varsity Way, which is a high quality route between Oxford and Cambridge. That's not suggesting people are going to cycle between the two every day, but it's a backbone of a structure across the region that we absolutely want to support.
Greg, are we doing enough for, you mentioned the need to boost the active travel agenda. Have we missed that opportunity?
I don't think we have missed it. I think the government has actually upped the ante on it through COVID. And I'd say two things, really. The first is that actually, from correspondence I get from constituents, from talking to constituents when I've done various visits over recent weeks, the evidence is that more and more people are cycling and are walking. Now, there is a limit to that within a rural setting. I represent a 335 square mile, predominantly rural constituency, and so there is a limit if you live in Buckingham and you work in London as to how far you could walk or cycle to work. But there is definitely that willingness among people to see if they can cycle or walk to a train station or to their nearest transport hub or whatever it might be. And the thing that people most want to see is those safe routes for cyclists, because in a rural environment, we've got to be honest with ourselves, cycling in backcountry lanes is not the safest thing that you could possibly do. Whilst the onus is on all road users to treat each other with respect, back lanes for people not in a motor vehicle are a dangerous place. And so we've got to build those cycleways. The one from Wadston into Aylesbury has been an enormous success. And I want to see more delivered, like the one I referenced earlier, Heartland to Tame, to ensure that those safe spaces are there for people to be able to use, predominantly in a rural setting, to get probably to a train station rather than to their end destination.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, building on that, Mayor Dave, the Baroness mentioned the fact that they were there to, or she was there to help you in local government take those difficult decisions. The reality is that local government is suffering big time now in terms of its finances, taking a major hit, lots and lots of additional pressures that you didn't think were going to exist. I mean, how do you in local government balance that, that unbalanceable, or square the unsquareable circle?
Well, with difficulty. Most things take money. It's always amazing how much a cycle lane like the one that Greg was mentioning costs. It still amazes me after 10 years. But I think it's actually, as the Minister said, making sure that we work not just with the Department for Transport, but with other departments. So when we are putting infrastructure in place, let's make sure we add that digital infrastructure. So for the people in some of our rural communities, be able to work at home 1 or 2 days a week, and then maybe cycling occasionally or cycle to the nearest shop rather than get a car. It's about having small incremental changes. And we've seen in Bedford, for example, that between peak flow and what appears to be no traffic, the difference is only 12% of cars. So you don't need a big reduction to see a significant change in the road, and that makes it safe for pedestrians and cyclists. So it's about making sure we work with the digital infrastructure, making sure we work with others to get some of those longer routes that Greg does.
Okay.
We won't be able to do everything ourselves. We have to work with partners.
Look, let me move that on and put another question to Greg and to Naomi that's come in here, and it's about this kind of engaging the private sector, because of course business is at the heart of the economic growth. But there's a question here from Dwight Mitchell saying, my business will end up closing the door in a few months' time as I'm struggling to connect with new businesses in a virtual world. I mean, businesses are struggling at the moment. But Greg, how do you make sure that the infrastructure is in there for, I suppose, what you might describe as traditional ways of doing business?
So did I get in the question there that was struggling to connect virtually? Is that a broadband
That's
issue,
right, yes.
digital connectivity?
Well, I think yes.
The government is clearly committed. We had in our manifesto the rollout of gigabit broadband to the hardest to reach areas first. That is something that I've been pushing the Department of Culture, Media and Sport on very hard in recent weeks, because I have a lot of communities where broadband simply isn't good enough to do business. There are communities where broadband is still below 2 megabits. There's still quite a big chunk where it can't get fiber whatsoever, and that gigabit broadband rollout is absolutely critical, along with the shared rural network, to improve mobile signal and mobile data signal across rural areas. That is something I'm pushing on very hard. There is a little bit of a delay in the gigabit rollout and the 5G rollout, which is linked to the national security concern around Huawei. But I think the ultimate goal is to get everybody from the hardest to reach areas first onto that super fast gigabit broadband. And that's something that actually is affecting big centres of job creation. I noticed you've got Westcott on your agenda later.
Well, just to clarify, Greg, what the question was actually referring to was, okay, there is a need to get the digital connectivity, but it's talking about physically connecting, getting the Heartland area back to work, getting people using offices again, getting people meeting face to face. I think that is the challenge which he's referring to.
No, absolutely, and I am all in favour of encouraging everybody to get on the train, or if necessary, get in a car or cycle or whatever it might be, to go back to the office or to go back to having, in a socially distanced, responsible manner, those face-to-face meetings. Because whilst the virtual world has saved us through the crisis of completely grinding to a halt, I still think there is a place where face-to-face meetings work infinitely better than virtual meetings, particularly when you're trying to close a business deal or when you're trying to work on a very sensitive project. So the trains are running. I can attest from my daily commute, they're pretty empty. They're pretty safe. The tube, if you're coming into London, is getting a bit busier, but it's still nothing like what it was. The buses are all operating, and I sat in Winslow in my constituency office the other week and watched loads of empty buses go past the window. So I would encourage people to put their mask on and to remain socially distanced, but to get out there and have the confidence to do business in person again, so that the economy doesn't completely stall.
A couple of quick questions, because we've got to move rapidly through this session, and it's about the point that you and the Minister made, which is about shovel-ready projects. Mayor Dave and Naomi, perhaps you can address this. There's a question coming here about they're surprised that you thought cycle projects were so expensive, Mayor Dave. But there's a view coming at that was from Graham Smith. Llewellyn Morgan says basically, we've estimated that just building Oxford's cycle infrastructure would be around 150 to 200 million pounds, assuming similar levels across the UK cities and towns. We need somewhere between 10 and 15 billion. Why don't we divert the road building fund to cycle infrastructure? So there's ideas around where the money's going to come from. But what's your view on shovel-ready projects? How do you
200 million
get these projects going?
Yeah, 200 million for a cycle project is not the money the councils have, Oxford or Bedford. So we are submitting to the spending review, and Naomi will maybe add to this some packages that support the planning, development and implementation. So there are, and this is one of the things that the England's Economic Heartland, the forum does, is look at these projects that will help the region's infrastructure and that are shovel ready, and that's the stuff we do. Encourage and support councils and groups of councils to make sure we can get those projects closer to shovel ready. So when we put them to the department, they're actually closer to being there. And if councils, transport authorities haven't got those, we'll support them and say, how do we get it closer to do that? How do we get the planning applications? How do we get all the stakeholders on board? And how do we make that work quicker? And there are projects, I think, in all councils that are shovel ready. Some of them are large and some of them are small, but maybe Naomi can add a little bit to that.
Naomi, what have you got up your sleeve shovel ready?
Thank you very much, Mayor Dave. I think it goes back to a comment actually that Greg Smith made earlier about schemes that cross boundaries, like the cycling scheme that Greg mentioned. What we need is to be able to have access to a pot of funding that is for the region to deliver the transport strategy, regardless of mode, regardless of seeking funding pots. That's where there is a huge amount of time taken, is the uncertainty of progressing a number of different funding pots. And when you talk about digital, you're talking about going into another government department to try and seek funding, and suddenly the point that Baroness Veer meant about working across government departments becomes very real when you are a local authority with lots of pressures trying to chase down funding pots. For us, the answer is a single regional pot that can respond to cross-boundary issues like Greg mentioned, can respond to some of the uncertainties that Mayor Dave talked about, and we can pull it all together to deliver a transport strategy that the Baroness has recognised as being ambitious, bold and innovative. Wrapping it all together in that way, England's Economic Heartland, I'm sure at the end of the day, Martin Tugwell, our Programme Director, will talk about the Capacity and Capability Project. That's what we see as the movement of the Acceleration Delivery Unit through to a sub-regional level. We've done the work, we've got the evidence, it's about taking it through to actually getting these things delivered now.
Great, thank you very much, Naomi. We're bang out of time. And this is a point that Alex Poppleton makes, that he absolutely agrees that cooperation across county boundaries is critical. It leaves people, communities on boundaries stuck between uncommunicative local government that has impact on real lives. So, Greg, final words. Are you feeling slightly more optimistic this year than perhaps we were at Herts University, or is it kind of a world of despondency and gloom?
I'm always optimistic. I'm very optimistic. I think clearly COVID has knocked everything over and has changed the way we look at virtually everything in the here and now, but that doesn't mean it's going to be with us forever. And I think if we're looking for opportunities out of what has been a pretty grim few months with the pandemic, it's that ability to build back better, that ability to build back greener and in a more environmentally friendly way, but never ever forgetting what it is we are fundamentally trying to do, getting people from A to B, getting people to work, to be able to do business, to be able to grow the economy and to employ more people and to create jobs, as well as obviously all the leisure uses that transport requires. So I think this is a great opportunity to knock down barriers, to work across county and city and town lines, and to ensure that we've got something that works for real people.
Great stuff. Greg Smith MP, Mayor Dave Hodgson, Naomi Green, thank you very much for joining us for that panel. That brings our theme one to a close. We're going to move rapidly on now, so to our next theme, which is what it means to me. So thanks very much, our panel. Do switch your cameras off and we will move rapidly on. There's loads and loads of questions that have come in, which is brilliant. One of which says, why is Dave referred to as Mayor Dave and when Greg Smith isn't being referred to as MP Greg? Dave needs to consider this. Anyway, apologies for that. Greg Smith MP, thanks very much for joining us now.
Well, I'm going to answer to most things.
I'm going to move rapidly on now and come up and be joined now by our next speaker, who's going to really kind of set the scene in terms of what it means to me. basically we're going to have over this next half an hour or so 3 short perspectives and a quick discussion to finish up with, really around how these transport improvements are going to be key to this unique business, this new unique area of the UK. I'm going to start off with Nigel Mackenzie. Welcome, Nigel. Nigel, give us a wave so we know who you are. There you go. He's smiling. There you go. He's waving. Yeah, Nigel. Because I don't think you're actually labelled it. We're also going to be joined by Paul Leinster. Paul, welcome. I can see you there. And also Lucy Ellis is also joining us. I will introduce them just before they speak. But Nigel, tell us about the Westcott project, which you manage, and how this is going to be key and unique to actually driving businesses across the region. Nigel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Anthony. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I look after Westcott Venture Park. Westcott is a 650-acre site. It sits on the A41 between Aylesbury and Bicester. It had a short period during the Second World War as a training base for RAF bomber crews, but the main thing was in 1946, the government chose Westcott as the place for its research and development and testing of missile systems and rocket propulsion and rocket motors. I think the government chose it. It was fairly close to London, but it was very much off the radar in terms of access, transport, connectivity, very rural, very low profile. And in fact, didn't appear on maps, I don't think, for many, many years. It passed into from government ownership to private ownership in the mid-80s, and then morphed into an industrial and business park. But we've still got companies here that do rocket testing and rocket research and development. So for my clients, my role really has been to leverage that heritage and that those companies that are still on the site to create a technology hub, an ecosystem, if you like, which majors on space and rocketry, but also other things related to propulsion systems, communications, drones, that sort of thing. And I think it's probably accepted by most people that creative people, when you put them together, they can create new ideas, new collaborations. So the idea of the hub is I think, generally accepted as something we should be striving for. And if you add into the mix training, bringing new people into those industries, you can get a pretty attractive commercial proposition. So I think our challenges, transport challenges here, are accessing the labour force, the nearest town being Aylesbury, that's 7 miles away. Also recognising that training is for younger people, maybe don't have driving licenses, don't have cars. You've got to still get those people to this site. I think the unique nature of what we do, or some of what we do here, rocket testing is a pretty unusual thing to happen on a commercial rather than a military sort of base. It's quite unique. We do get a lot of people from nationally and internationally need to visit to see what's going on, to visit the companies that are already here. And I think the other point is that we need to connect with the other technology hubs that are in the area. So that's that would cover Bedfordshire. It certainly covers Oxfordshire, Hertfordshire, and Buckinghamshire, obviously. So I think to Greg Smith's point about crossing county boundaries, I think that's very much important to us, because we fit in with the other, with the other technology hubs in the region. So those are our sort of challenges, I think, is to open ourselves up for those 4 things. So
Nigel, thank you very much indeed. Certainly sounds like a very interesting. I'm going to come back to you a bit later on in the panel session to ask you a bit more about this issue, which we heard about earlier, which is cross-boundary cooperation and really trying to make that work. So have a think about that. I'm going to come back to you in the panel session with loads of more questions that are arriving on my screen. But first, let me introduce Lucy Ellis. Lucy, welcome. Lucy is a rail engineering apprentice at Laing O'Rourke, working with the East West Rail project. And I think, Lucy, you're going to talk to us about your experiences and how you think that the work you're doing really influences your work and life in the Heartland. So tell us a bit about, give us a quick update on the project, but very quick, but mainly give us your experiences of working as a young engineer. What does it mean to you? Lucy.
Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, so as Anthony just said, I'm an engineer here at EEH. So EEH is predominantly collecting Oxford, Cambridge. I'm in the Bletchley section, which is in the 2C section of phase 2. So we've worked all the way through COVID. We had government permission to do so, and we're currently dismantling our bridge, as I'm sure if you read the New Civil Engineer or Rail magazine, you would have seen. So we're currently taking off the bridge decks. Each deck is different, but some of the most impressive ones, we're removing a deck full item, so it's about 350 tonne, with some of the largest cranes in England here at the minute. I've had the privilege to be here for the last 4 years, so I started in design and have moved into construction, so know the project pretty well, which I'm very lucky. I joined straight out of school as an apprentice with Lang Rourke, so I've been here doing my degree on the same time, so I'm a degree apprentice. I'm very fortunate that I don't have any debt going through, and I think that's really important in encouraging young people like myself, particularly female engineers that don't necessarily fit what is the norm into the industry, and I've been very lucky in doing so with all the opportunities of the English Economic Heartland with rail. Certainly, if you'd asked me 5 years ago whether I'd been in rail, the answer would have been a solid no. I joined in construction expecting to be on large projects. I think that's really important to note that rail isn't what it used to be anymore. It's not shoveling ballast or walking up and down the lines, which I think quite often people stereotype it as. I'm here as a civil engineer, delivering the project, doing the heavy dismantling and the reconstruction of the bridge, which is using a lot of new technologies going forward. And I think that's really important to note. I think the change in industry coming through, I'm a bit biased, I haven't necessarily seen the change over the last 20 years, but as a female engineer and as a young engineer as well, I feel definitely at home, definitely supported. And I think there's attitude changes coming around, and I think that's really important to push forward to the wider community. It definitely has to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach, so managers have to be encouraging that kind of influence and recruitment of the engineers, and on a bottom level, the groundsmen have a change in attitude of wanting you to be there as well, because I think definitely going back in time a couple of years, it wouldn't have been the norm to have us there, and certainly there are still people that are a bit sceptical of having a female engineer on site, but I think it's definitely a way forward.
Lucy, thank you very much. I'm interested. Is that right, that people are still pushing back against having female engineers on site, or is that surely changing rapidly, isn't it?
It's definitely changing rapidly. It's definitely a minority. I think if I had to stereotype, and excuse me stereotyping, it's definitely the older generation who have predominantly worked in the mail industry their entire lives, and it's a new form, so people are having to adapt and change. I don't think it's a bad thing. I've never had a bad experience on site with anybody, and maybe that's just because I'm skeptical at first of how to approach people, understanding what they're used to and knowing that I'm not necessarily what they're used to. I certainly when I joined the project in 2C in Bletchley, I was the only female engineer. We had other females within the team, so we had the environmentalists and the project managers, but I was the only female engineer. And certainly when I do night shift now, I do look around and I'm still one of the only female engineers, but we are lucky we have 3 at the minute. And I think people are definitely adapting. We're still a minority, but did I know that when I was coming onto site? Yeah, it's a male-dominated industry and you can't deny that. But I think an attitude change is definitely happening, and I think it's a really positive change. I think the next step forward is possibly encouraging more people into the industry. It's not necessarily a glamorized industry. It is very hard work at times, but the moment I pick up a shovel, I get it taken off me very quickly. There's definitely that still protection around females, but I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. But definitely the quality side of things is coming through, and I really enjoy the industry that I'm in.
Just as a segue to our next speaker, Paul Einstein, could you just give it? I mean, obviously, being in the next generation of engineers, presumably you are able to put a lot of pressure on your employer around the need to drive sustainability and to make sure that you're working on projects. I mean, presumably you choose to work on a rail project because you think that's a more sustainable project than, I don't know, a road project or an airport. I don't know. Do you make those kind of decisions as a young engineer?
There's definitely, if I wanted to or needed to, the opportunity for me to, but if I'm being honest, certainly the project that I'm on now, and it's the only project I've known, and I didn't choose to come on this project, and I think I'm really pleased that I didn't choose to, because I don't think I would have necessarily ended up on it if I had chosen, because a railway project wasn't something I originally considered, but I'm really pleased I'm here. The employers, whether that be Laing O'Rourke or be the Alliance Party on the East West Rail front, I don't think we need to, or I don't feel like I have to put that pressure on, because sustainability is at the heart of everything that we do. You look at the way we deal with the external community, you look at the way that's at the forefront, the way we deal with environmental sustainability, that is the forefront of how we plan our works. And we can't get away with that. And do I personally feel like I need to do anything to help encourage my employers? No. But do I feel like when I'm planning my works, I have to consider that as a forefront of my mind? Then yes. But I think it's so ingrained by now that that is the way that the industry will deliver large scale construction projects, that it's just there.
Okay. I'm going to then, as a segue into our next speaker, Paul Lyons. So Paul is going to give an environmental perspective. Paul is a professional of environmental assessment at Cranfield University, former chief executive of the Environment Agency until 2015, and is now the lead on the Oxford-Cambridge Arc Environmental Group. Paul, give us a perspective of why is it important to consider transport propositions in the wider system? Do you hear what Lucy's saying around the choices around sustainability? Paul.
Thank you, Anthony, and good morning. Just one thing, it's Laura Church who leads the Oxcam Arc Environment Group. I'm leading the Oxcam Arc Local Natural Capital Plan program. But just,
my apologies.
No, not at all.
Laura has been substantially name checked there, so Laura, get in touch.
Yes. So I think it's vital that we consider the transport propositions within the wider system within which they operate, including interactions with new housing, new employment, the natural environment, and the associated governance arrangements. If you don't consider the various aspects as a system, I believe there's going to be a high probability that of perverse outcomes, and that the environment will be adversely affected. And the various environmental aspects which are being talked about just now, such as net zero carbon, net biodiversity gain, net environment gain, natural capital, also need to be considered as an integrated whole and an integrated system. Again, if they're not, there's a high probability of perverse outcomes. And too often environmental aspects are considered within silos and singly. And for me, I think it's vital that all of the organizations involved in the transport programs and new infrastructure and projects commit to achieving net environment and net biodiversity gain, and also net zero carbon. I think that legally, people through the Environment Act, when it comes in, will have to meet net biodiversity gain, but that only applies to town and country planning applications. There's no requirement on transport infrastructure to meet those requirements, and I think there should be. And also, it's only net biodiversity gain, not net environment gain. And I think both the transport infrastructure, but also the town and country planning commitment should be to net environment gain as well as net biodiversity gain. Then across the whole of the Oxcam Arc, there's an agreed for there's need for an agreed baseline of the natural capital assets, the associated ecosystem services and biodiversity, in terms of the extent, the condition, and the connectivity, and the risks that are being faced. And there needs to be an agreed methodology for both net biodiversity gain and net environment gain, which again goes arc-wide. Thank you.
So, Paul, can I just build on that, and I suppose building on what I was talking to Lucy about? I mean, given the pressure on government right now to really drive, or the pressure that they are putting on local authorities and the private sector to drive shovel-ready projects to really kind of drive the economy, is there bandwidth in thinking, in political decision making, in budgetary concerns around delivering net zero carbon emissions. Is that going to just slip behind the, by the wayside?
I think there should be the bandwidth, and it just needs to be incorporated into the thinking. It's the same with net biodiversity gain and net environment gain. I mean, one of the issues in this whole area is that individual groups and individual projects are doing their own baselines, looking at their own methodology, and so one of the things that happens is that there's quite a considerable amount of duplication of effort in terms of working out what baseline conditions are and where we want to go. And I think that if people were to share more, then there would be considerable savings, and also there would be an agreed purpose.
Which perhaps leads me back to the question I was going to put to Nigel at the start, which is around this whole cross-boundary cooperation. I mean, Paul, you mentioned breaking away from siloed thinking, and that's a very sectorial siloed thinking. But Nigel, how do you, with a project like Westcott, that you need to get so many different parties involved? How do you get that cross-boundary, cross-organisation, lack of siloed thinking working? How do you do that? Because it's not the way we operate typically.
No, it's not, and we've now got a unitary authority, which will help us a bit. We were dealing with Aylesbury Vale from a planning perspective, and from other, the other things we go through to develop buildings. I think we haven't addressed the issue of cross boundaries with transport at all. We talked to Silverstone, we talked to Harwell, we talked to Cranfield, and I think it's fair to say we don't address the cross-border, the cross sort of boundary issue in regard to transport. But just coming back on what Paul was saying about biodiversity and net zero carbon, I think those issues are very much at the forefront of our minds here. We've got 650 acres, so you can imagine we've got quite a lot of biodiversity going on, and it's something that we have taken a holistic approach to over our site, which we hope will simplify things like planning, so that planning authorities can look at it and say, yeah, these guys have got, they understand what they're doing. That will cut down things like planning application times and things like that. If we've got systems in place or strategies in place, let's say for biodiversity, net zero carbon's a tricky one. We've talked to Greg Smith about this as well. We're looking at the way we provide power on the site. We've got a solar park here. We've got a planning for another large solar array, and that will help us with things like net zero carbon, I think. And a lot of the people that come here are very focused on those sort of issues now. So the businesses that we deal with ask those questions. So we've got to be ready to answer them. But no, we don't have that yet.
Greg also mentioned on the need for development of hydrogen technology. I mean, Paul, is that something which do you share the MP's concerns over the drive towards electric power? Should we be focusing, as he said, on more hydrogen development?
I think that we need both. I think it's interesting. I mean, the minister, the MP was very clear that when diesel came in, because it was being thought of as a carbon issue, then it missed the oxides of nitrogen issue, the health impact. And too often there is thinking like that. Now, one of the consequences of electric vehicles, they're often heavier, particulates from tire wear and also brake wear are greater. And so in some areas, we're seeing an increase in the levels of particulate matter. It just needs to be considered. And rather than going, we're all going to go this way or it's all going to be that, then we need to be looking at how we bring in and what's the appropriate technology in an appropriate area.
Okay. I'll just give a check to Saira Hussain, who raised this question earlier, and she says, he says, I'm not sure. I agree that hydrogen needs further thinking and investment. Cars are not going away anytime soon. How can we begin to see better infrastructure to support alternative fuels such as electric and hydrogen? And I suppose, Lucy, I mean, we hear a lot of kind of talk about really trying to championing new ideas, new innovations, new infrastructure such as this. I mean, do you see, do you feel the burden as a young engineer of the need to really drive these kind of new technologies?
Yeah, there's certainly a big emphasis on the way that we go about designing and delivering the works on end-to-life products, so using it right from the start on how things are produced and where they're manufactured from and how we get them to site, through to how we construct them. And then we also need to consider the end of life. So at the minute, a key example there would be the decks that we're currently crushing are being recycled and reused as ground fill material for us in construction on haul roads. So there's a large emphasis on how we reuse and recycle the materials that we are having on site and considering the main environment. That's a really big emphasis going forward. I will say it's probably not considered as much as it should be, and there are various reasons for that, but a key example there is East West Rail Phase 2 not being electrified. Yes, we're making passive provisions, we're not prohibiting future electrification of the line, but it's not going in this section. And should that be the case, if you ask my opinion, then it should be. We should still be electrifying it, but back in 2016, that was de-scoped. So there's probably not as much emphasis as I think there should be in future systems, but certainly the way we go to deliver and how we design the works to be delivered in construction of full life cost is definitely a consideration for us. Because
obviously Laing O'Rourke's got a huge investment in DFMA and really trying to go towards modular. Are you, as a design engineer, as a delivery engineer, are you encouraged, are you rewarded for coming up with new ideas and new ways of actually delivering, which are lower carbon, lower energy, better for the environment, better for communities? Yes, there definitely are. There's been a lot of innovation around the way we're going to build a new bridge or the viaduct in Bletchley. We're using a lot of new technologies and the way we go to construct, and that's actually using Laing O'Rourke's DFMA department and looking at the cost of concrete. So typically for Laing O'Rourke, the precast elements are brilliant and I can't fault them at all, but they use quite a expensive concrete because of the way that they're built and constructed and cured. And then bring them all the way down from Explore manufacturing, which is obviously up in the north, can be quite costly. So we're looking at ways that we can involve the kind of speciality of DFMA, as well as a much better source of concrete around local. So we've got Cemex down by us, so we'll be combining the two to kind of try and make it more environmentally friendly. Certainly are rewarded if you come up with new innovations and ways to deliver the project. But we also have a full innovation department within East West Rail, which is very unusual for construction sites. And I'd hope that construction going forward involves the department and has a budget for innovations, because I think that is what is really driving the industry at the minute, is having a team that's solely dedicated in looking at the way we can deliver works more efficiently, more cost effective, more better for the environment. So that's key, I think, to us. Okay, just take a few questions from the floor. Richard Ward-Jones says, I think probably for Paul and for Nigel, procurement is a major barrier to achieving net zero without being clearly specified by clients in procurement activity, and in particular where net zero does not form part of the assessment criteria against which suppliers are scored, things will continue to improve too slowly. How do we overcome that, Paul?
Absolutely. I mean, I think procurement and also public sector procurement has got a huge role to play in specifying both, as Lucy was mentioning earlier, that we should be basing things on whole life costs in our decision making. I also chair BPHA, which is one of the major housing associations within the ARC. And one of the things that we're looking at there is, how do we factor in carbon, the new heating systems that have to go into houses? How do we retrofit our existing? And that's an active discussion that we're now having at the board. So boards have a role in this, but it's for anybody who's deciding to make sure that we do factor net zero into procurement, net environment gain and net biodiversity gain into the procurement decisions.
Nigel, what about? I mean, how are you actually procuring now as a client, as a developer?
Well, we would just go to tender to contractors. I think, though, to the point, we're probably driven partly by planning, by building regulations. Those things have a role to play in how we design buildings. But also, I think it's probably driven by the consumer, by the occupier of the buildings that we build. They're the people that will determine how efficient their building needs to be. There's a lot more emphasis today on running costs. So running costs start to creep into the specification of the building now, which it never used to. And those sort of things do drive efficiency of heating systems and so on. So, and things like air conditioning, maybe, big site here, we don't necessarily need, the air handling that you might need in the city centre. I think it's driven partly by the client and their knowledge and their wish to be, if you like, as efficient as they can be, and working with sustainable materials. So that will drive us as much as planning, but also we're a pension fund. So the investors in the fund that own Westcott Venture Park are very alive to these issues. It's no longer a box ticking exercise to be sustainable. So we're driven on a number of fronts.
That's good to hear, and I think Paul would probably say it needs to be even further up the agenda. And the point that's made by Alex Poppleton on the questions here, great point on procurement. Procurement specialists do not have environmental expertise. It needs to be -- 1 criteria rather than cost. Discussed. I'm going to give Lucy the final word, just because, I want to. We're bang out of time. Lucy, fascinating project, fascinating career. I suppose if you were to try to sit there in 20 seconds, persuade someone to join the industry, how would you do that?
So personally, I would probably remind them that it's such a diverse industry. I'm not in a rail project, although it's a rail project scheme. I'm very much in an infrastructure project, which combines a whole host of multidisciplinary items, whether that's from environmental, procurement, commercial, to the on-ground site team, to the engineers behind. There's generally a job for every single person. And the biggest bit of advice I give individuals kind of in my position or slightly younger, just joining the industry, is put yourself out there and don't knock any opportunity, because certainly if I had done that, I wouldn't have ended up in rail, and I'm loving it at the minute. I think infrastructure is brilliant as a whole, and it has so many different opportunities based on your skills, talents, and interest, that there's a job for everybody, and I solely believe that.
Great stuff. No, well, thanks hugely for sharing your experiences there, Lucy, and thanks Paul, thanks Nigel for joining us there on this panel session. Certainly, it's a very challenging time to be delivering a project like this, but also, I suppose you could say, one of huge opportunities to do things differently. And I think, Paul, that's the point you're trying to make, is to try to make sure that people are actually transforming the sector differently. So thanks very much. We're going to move rapidly on to our next theme. So thanks for your questions. Also, lots and lots of questions coming in here. Keep them coming. And we're now going to move straight to the next session, which is around shaping. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Nigel. Do switch off your machines, switch off your cameras, and hopefully we will then be able to. Everyone's now rejoining now for the next panel session. Great stuff. Shaping the future. We're going to talk for 40 minutes or so around shaping the future. And really looking at how we should be developing our skills, priorities, and strategy for the transport future. We have a cast of thousands joining me here, cast of thousands. Everyone's been briefed to be very, very concise. In fact, I'm going to do it by putting some questions to everyone. I'm going to do it to try and get some more interaction going. I'm going to put a load of questions. Let me introduce our panel. Emily Seabrook, welcome, Emily. Give us a wave, Emily, just so people know who you are. Welcome, Emily. Also, let me introduce Steve Gooding. Steve, yeah, Steve, you're there. Steve Gooding, welcome to the panel. Abby Nichols, Abby, yeah, you're there. And Gemma Ball from the Catapult. I will introduce you just before you start. But let me just put a few quick questions to everyone just to get us cracking before we move to the panel session. But if you do want to just jump in at any point, anyone who wants to answer the questions, then do that. But Emily, let's start with Emily Seabrook. Emily is going to give us a view of the future as the Heartland-based graduate engineer with Skanska. In fact, Emily, you were the winner of the England's Economic Heartland Young Professionals Vision 2050 competition, which was judged by a whole range of hugely important people, such as Sadie Morgan of the National Infrastructure Commission, to mention just one. I'll start with you. The world is changing rapidly. Emily, we've heard, everyone that's spoken this morning has mentioned this, external forces such as COVID, climate change. I mean, what is your vision for transport in 2050? And I bet you didn't, when you wrote your piece one year, the award, I bet you didn't even think about coronavirus, did you? Emily, what do you think? Yeah. What's your vision?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't on my agenda back in December. I think a successful transport system would allow the everyday commuter to get from A to B using many different modes of transport seamlessly. And I think there'll be a lot less reliance on the private car, and culturally supported active travel would just become the default norm for society. And I think this can be really underpinned by like 3 key values or design principles, you could call them. So it's got to be holistic, and it's got to be intelligent and iterative. So holistic, thinking about the bigger picture of how the Heartland's actually working and how the people are actually interacting. And then it's got to be intelligent, so picking up that data from their movements and picking up that data to inform the iterative design, so working out where the hotspots are in the network. And this kind of intelligent data can be iterative to inform the user where's best to go, how's best to get there, and also to inform the road managers of where do we need to be improving the system, or where do we need to be doing like holistic big picture design and thinking. But okay. I think also we need to be thinking.
Yeah, Karen, sorry, I interrupted you, apologies.
No problem. If we're living in kind of the car-free cities and we're all doing active travel seamlessly across many different modes, we need to think, how can freight work? So freight needs to be able to sit alongside this. So I think a big focus will be on the carbon heavy last mile, because we all like our stuff to come to us. So perhaps using consolidation centres to rethink how freight works, and demanding that the companies work together to provide net zero for like our betterment, really.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, what do you see as the major changes that we face when it comes to the next generation's use of transport, and the way that you are kind of, we heard earlier about the need to perhaps reframe our thinking away from cars being the obvious way to travel, more towards the fact that, I mean, bikes are changing. We have mechanical doping now, where bikes are available to all sorts of folks who to travel huge amounts of distance using electric power. But how do you see young people, the next generation, actually using the transport system?
I think as young people, net zero is massively in our favour, and having a shift in how we use the transport system is going to happen, like no matter what, because a lot of journeys are being turned on their head. So we've got our stuff coming to us, but also we're changing how we're living. So a transport system needs to be very in touch with the data of how we're buying houses in different locations, commuting differently, and perhaps just the culture. We need to be aware of the culturally supported active travel and providing the infrastructures to allow us to live net zero, because as a young person we might see the immediate barriers of the train perhaps being more expensive than the car. It perhaps doesn't weigh up at the moment. So I think the provision needs to be there for it to be illogical to take the private car, and for it to be the natural move to take a net zero decision by default.
So did your work on your vision, it used to be, I suppose, it's interesting, my son has just passed his driving test, and I suppose when I passed my driving test, it was a different thing. It feels like, for him it's not such a necessity. It's more of a sort of a life kind of mark, but it's not a necessity. When I was passing, it felt like a necessity. Is it still easy and cool to use a car, or is it kind of going the other way? Is it uncool to use a car nowadays?
Well, I hope one day it will just be not a question. Like, I hope at the moment, I think it's cool to use the car because, well, you don't want to be the awkward one leaving the dinner party at like 8:50 because the train leaves at 8:53 to get home safely in the dark. And I think if there's that provision of really good infrastructure and really seamless connections, it just won't be a thing to use the private car, and it will be the default will be for us to use kind of the nodes outside the city and to use the eco-friendly, sustainable methods of transport.
Okay. So based upon your the work that you did with your vision, what has to happen next then? How do we move to this new paradigm?
I can only speak from my generation's perspective, really, because that's all I've got experience of. But I think we can't expect the perfect transport system to land on our plate. So I think we need, as young people, have a say and to get involved, because if not, net zero is going to be my problem when I'm a chartered engineer later down the line, and I don't want to be untangling that mess because something wasn't done now. And I think if we have the means as young people, it's really great that we could live kind of disruptively, so we could live as if we plan to in 2050. So, for example, even though it's a bit annoying to take my bike onto the train, get the train and then cycle the other end, at least then I can identify the pinch points in the network and flag them up at, for example, the draft transport consultation. And I can flag things up like that because I'm making people aware that we do need more from our transport system if we are going to live net zero and make use of all these innovations that are available to us.
Yeah, well, Emily, thanks a lot. I mean, we're going to come back to and discuss a few more general points, and certainly, Steve, I'm going to be putting you on the spot in terms of your responsibilities in terms of what of driving the agenda for the next generation as well. But let me turn to our next speaker, Abby Nichols. Oh, by the way, I've just realised that I didn't introduce George Nicola. George, you were hiding behind my control panel. I didn't see you there landing there, George. There you go. Look, I can see you now. George from the Catapult as well, systems architect from the Catapult. I'll introduce you in a minute, but welcome. Abby Nichols, though, first. Abby is transport strategy project lead with the Heartland, well, can you outline your connectivity studies and how these have influenced the transport priorities that you've been planning? I suppose, what do you see as the transport strategies? What are the transport strategies for, and how are they going to help shape the future connectivity in the region, Abby?
Yeah, really interested to hear Emily's point about holistic transport systems. I think that's very much what we've been approaching in our transport strategy, very much seeing the transport system as a system, integration of modes and taking that forward within our connectivity studies. So we are planning a series of connectivity studies, which we've outlined in our draft transport strategy, and there's an attachment on the side pane as well, which shows the programme of studies that we're planning on taking forward. But our studies are very much looking forward to how we can take our draft transport strategy policies and principles through to actual action. So really planning in how we use that vision of connecting the Heartland. Regional connectivity is obviously, in essence, is what we do and what we really want to see within defined areas in a way which is looking at both physical and digital connectivity. So I've heard the importance of digital connectivity already quite a lot this morning. So really taking that holistic view of trying to connect people within defined areas across both those things, taking into account the principles of our transport strategy. So they're looking at decarbonisation, quality of life, freight, really connecting people as well. So taking a holistic view of, before about not just assessing costs, so benefit cost ratios, but also looking at how that can meet the decarbonisation agenda, the environmental net gain agenda. So really looking at a series of connectivity solutions and opportunities within those defined areas that we can take forward to our transport strategy investment pipeline to then take forward to delivery. So it's very much about working with our partners to look to the future. So this section here is about how we look to the future. What do partners see as their aspirations for defined areas? So our local authority partners, enterprise partnerships. There's a lot of economic activity and economic ambition for the area. So how do we make that a reality by delivering connectivity solutions which meet the ambitions for those people within those areas? So it's really about looking to the future, working with our partners to see what we need to deliver to help connectivity in those areas.
Okay, and certainly when you were addressing those principles and policies in the transport study, I mean, you were looking at things such as travel hierarchy. I mean, how is that all kind of shifting and changing? We heard this morning a lot of questions coming in around that hierarchy perhaps changing. What do you how do you build that into the work you're doing?
Yeah, so we're really keen to get a balanced programme for our investment pipeline, and that is very much taking into account the travel hierarchy. So within our transport strategy, one of our policies is around having a travel hierarchy, which we have active travel modes at the top, and then working down we have public transport, so quite a traditional travel hierarchy. But we really want to take that into account in how we assess some of the solutions that might be put forward for connectivity in that region. So not just think about roads, and we're very clear that we might need to address roads. So Greg Smith mentioned before about wing and particular issues on the network that we might look at through these studies, and I like to look at through the studies, but really thinking about actually what is that travel hierarchy. We want people to be using active travel modes to get to a station, thinking about how places are built, making nice places to live, as well as just connecting by roads. So we really want to get to the balanced programme, so we're really thinking about those travel hierarchy, putting active travel modes first, but also again that links through to how we can achieve some of the decarbonisation commitments and priorities that we have within the transport strategy. So it is very much thinking about what we put in our transport strategy and really trying to take that through to action.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, and for action for you, I mean, that is all about really trying to deliver that towards packages of work, presumably, packages of delivery. What happens next?
Yeah, so as part of the study, we're looking to commission the studies as to essentially get to an ultimate point where we have packages of interventions that will meet the connectivity ambitions and challenges. So we are hoping to go through a study process, which is almost a non-traditional study process, so very much making it a holistic transport system approach, where we go through, work with our partners, think about scenario setting, think about long list of interventions that might meet those scenarios, assessing those interventions against some of the things we talked about, the travel hierarchy, the principles, to get to a point where we have a package, a series of packages which we think will meet those, which provide good value for money, but also meet decarbonisation and all those bits and pieces in a way which is also brought into partner support, which we can then feed into our investment pipeline within the transport strategy, which we hope to refresh on a 5-year basis, and then take those forward, working with our partners to recommend next steps to how we get to delivery. And they mentioned at the beginning also thinking that a good way forward for us would be a regional funding settlement to be able to then deliver those things within our transport strategy. That's really important, having the certainty around where the funding is coming from to be able to take those next steps.
And presumably that will also include tackling issues such as mentioned by Paul, which is about breaking down silos, really getting people thinking holistically about the way that they deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are very much studies about working with our partners and taking on local ambitions, again working across the boundaries. So a lot of the areas do cross local authority boundaries. So for example, some of the corridors are, for example, kind of London, Buckinghamshire, Milton Keynes, Northampton, and that goes across a few local authority boundaries. And so that will be very much about working with partners in all those places to make sure we come up with a study brief that, and it's never easy to get a study brief that everybody agrees with, but to get to a point where people are happy to take forward a study brief that meets the needs of all those partners.
Okay, we'll come back in a few moments, Abby, and drill into some more issues around that when we get into some questions from the floor, but also some more panel discussion. But let's hear now. Let's go into space. Let's hear from Gemma Ball, Business Development and Transport Lead at the Satellite Applications Catapult, and also to join. Gemma is joined by George Nicola, Business Development Technical Solutions Architect, also with the Catapult. Now you're going to talk to us about the role that space plays in the development space. As a very, am I saying that right? Space, in a very Trumpian way. Yeah. Space. So the way that the role that space plays in the development and the decarbonisation of intelligent transport infrastructure. Gemma, to what extent? Well, you know, tell us about your work. How are you going to make that happen? To what extent do you see the current COVID pandemic accelerating our move towards positive climate factors?
Well, I actually think so. So thank you, Anthony, and thanks so far for the introduction. I'm really inspired by the holistic viewpoints from the previous speakers. I agree with it immensely. But I actually want to draw an example of how COVID has really accelerated the net zero goals that we wish to achieve. And actually, prior to COVID, were they ever really achievable? Because yes, we are going to be going down the road of electronic vehicles, but actually we travel more than ever. So for me, we're starting to assess why we need to travel. And what I actually want to draw attention to is because of COVID, we had to diversify our business to include new strategies in order to achieve the net zero goals that we're looking at in transport. And because we are working remotely and because we're working more effectively by that, we actually were able to recruit George, who is nowhere near our region and wouldn't normally probably come and work at Harwell, but because we are able to work remote and actively work remotely, that has enabled a really fantastic relationship. So, but what satellites do is they empower network infrastructure, and they empower because they communicate, they provide insight, they navigate. And I think when we start realizing about what connectivity can do, enabled by such interventions such as satellites, it starts allowing us to say, well, actually, do we need to travel? And actually, why do we have to travel? And I think this really starts to sort of reflect on the regional ambitions to sort of create new skills and services. And what I also believe as well is you can also be a farmer and still work in a digital environment too. So that's why I think satellites are going to be a bit of a forefront in that delivery service. And the more people realize what satellites can do, the more they'll see that they very much integrate with most of the technologies that we've got on our around us today. And we have had some new strong government agenda items that have come out very recently, and not face-to-face meetings, I might add as well, where we've seen new developments, and I think this will empower the region.
Okay, so when you talk about I mean, what you're effectively talking about is the use of more connected digital technologies. I mean, I mean, you talk about the use of satellites, but effectively, what you're really trying to encourage is the use of more digital connected technologies. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we talk about how we work remotely, to be effective in your work remotely, you need to be connected. Now, I live in Buckinghamshire and I live in a nice, lovely village. And yes, we have many spots where not always is it able to be connected. So what we want to do is provide resilience against that, and satellites can do that for you.
So the reason I was, because the point that was made by the MP earlier, Greg Smith, was around this, the provision of fast fiber. I mean, so what is the relationship? Just give us a quick kind of like A to B on the relationship between satellite technology and fast fiber and building those kind of networks.
Well, this is where I'd like to bring to the floor George, because George is the technical solutions architect. So we have a very great way of working together at the Catapult. The Catapult brings in people with hard skills such as myself, business development, very much about user requirements, so engaging with primes and SMEs and government agenda. And then we also attract, hopefully, very talented people like George, who has the technical understanding of how all this would work together to create such a system. George. Thanks, George.
Welcome.
So thank you, Jim. I could almost feel that coming my way. So good morning, everyone. So yes, I'm the technical solutions architect at the Satellite Applications Catapult, supporting intelligent transport solutions. But to give you a little bit of background, I'm actually a child engineer myself, an avionics engineer by trade. So I default to things that fly. So you'll have to forgive me if I move to urban air mobility at any point during the conversation. But to answer your question, Anthony, about how satellites and fiber coexist, if you will, one of the programs we've been looking at actually now and architecting around one of the government initiatives through OneWeb, in fact, was about hybridizing 5G and satellite. So one of the things about ubiquitous connectivity is actually, when we say ubiquitous connectivity and bridging the digital divide, we actually mean everywhere, right? And that is an issue for lots of cellular providers, because you have to roll out some significant infrastructure to provide that connectivity. So fiber, 5G nodes, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's an undertaking. And sometimes in the really rural areas, the business case just doesn't stack up. Now, imagine a world where you don't have to put the backhaul in place and you can do it over satellite. So now you no longer need to have that infrastructure roll out. What you need to do is a more simple crowd cell, for example, that could be deployed remotely, and then you can backhaul the traffic over satellite, which is an infrastructure which is already in space. So now you can extend the reach of your broadband networks without necessarily actually having to put the broadband network in.
Right, so it's a way of more efficiently, more cost effectively delivering in perhaps in rural areas such as the Heartland. One of the things, okay, the next step towards that, maybe this is one for Gemma, is how does that help you to travel? How does it help you? And the phrase I think you use is travel because you want to, not because you have to. Are you trying to create a world where everyone sits at home all the time?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I consider myself to be quite a social butterfly, and I certainly don't like sitting at home staring at four walls all the time. But actually, if I think about my life today and how it's changed rapidly since commuting all the time into the office, trying to get through traffic, trying to get back to childcare, trying just to, you work in almost to live, when actually that's probably not the agenda that we wanted to start off with, especially when we're thinking about children. What you want is a combination of all. So you want to be able to, know that you can go into the office and actually you're not necessarily timetabled to a structure. The idea that you have to wait for a bus or have to leave early because you must get this bus or it's the last one, that's not the world we want to live in today. We want to be able to have travel in an autonomous fashion.
Emily, is that right? Is she right about the world you want to live in?
Yeah, exactly. Like, if I could seamlessly get from A to B without even like noticing that I'd travelled from A to B, that would be fantastic. Okay. And to just say at the end of it, like, it just works.
Well, Gemma, how do you what are the critical steps towards? I mean, give Abby some advice about the critical steps towards creating this truly intelligent transport solution.
Well, I think that's one of the key elements there that you've just stated, is actually finding out the information from those that know best. So we are a satellite applications catapult. It's our job to foster relationships between government and primes. So I would absolutely reach out to Scanscar and have been doing so to factor in what are the requirements and actually what's the adaptability to integrate some of the solutions that we're offering, because there is going to be lots of adversary against, and particularly in rail as well, what this new solution will mean and why would it work better. And then not to obviously sort of put in some of the criticisms, but you've got to factor in cost and safety. And what we're saying is actually by bringing in together environmental needs, economic needs, but people's needs to travel and why they do, actually we could have a far more agile environment where, maybe I don't need to be in the office for 9, I can be in the office for 10 and still be as productive and actually optimize my work effectively. And I have to say, I think in lockdown, because we have got this no more 9-to-5 working day, I think lots of us are seeing far more productivity than we've ever seen before because we haven't got the stress of commuting.
Gemma, thank you very much. There's lots of questions coming in and I'm going to get to those, in one of which actually says very true, Gemma, from Sean Brown. Very true, Gemma. I'm not sure what he was referring to, but take it. Very true, Gemma. Thanks, Sean. Let us know what else you want to say about that, which particular point you think was very true. But until then, let me introduce our final speaker, Steve Gooding. Steve, welcome. Steve is the director of the RSC Foundation. Steve, you're going to set out the challenges or the connectivity challenges of rural communities within the Heartland. I mean, we hear a lot about the future of cities, Steve, when we talk about transport strategies, but of course, this region is largely rural. I mean, how does that impact the future? How does that change the way we need to be thinking about these solutions, Steve?
Well, I think we've heard quite a bit about that from speakers this morning, right from the outset when Baroness Veer was on, but also picking up, for example, from Gemma saying what it's like to live in a small village and have other commitments that you're trying to fit round in a largely car-dependent world. And I think it's just fair to say that we need to start where we are, and where we are is that rural communities tend to be more car-dependent, and also they're extremely hard to provide what we might think of as traditional public transport or mass transit solutions, because the brute fact is if you haven't got that many people, creating a viable business case to run a public transport service is very hard.
Mm-hmm. But I suppose I can see them coming in saying now, RSC Foundation, he would say that, wouldn't he? Cars are the solution. But I mean, are you talking about cars as we know them today, or are you thinking that the cars that you are seeing as the backbone of the rural communities need to change from what they are at the moment?
Well, I think that I would start by saying that I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying we need to be realistic where we're starting from. The fact is, even your son has decided to get a driving license. When the DVSA reopened bookings for car tests 2 weeks ago, the site crashed. When I spoke to the chief exec yesterday, he said that when they offered 375,000 tests, they were snapped up within about an hour. So there's a lot of people thinking that if they want to have access to jobs, employment, if they want to get to where they need to be, then maybe they need to drive to get there. But I think we are on the edge of seeing some very big changes in the way we think about transport, which Emily and others have pointed towards. Part of which is changes in the vehicles themselves. Increasingly, they could be powered in a zero tailpipe way, as the MP, Greg Smith, was talking about earlier. Might be electric, might be battery electric, might be hydrogen. There might be 2, 3 or 4 wheel vehicles. There might be electrically boosted, but things like electrically boosted bicycles or scooters. I think personally I'd feel slightly nervous riding an electric scooter down some of the country lanes in England's economic heartland, but it might be something that we'll look at. But I think the other part of it is we've really got to think about the trips that we make. And that takes me to, I think, the point several people made about the need to travel. And I think we need to distinguish what do we need to do and what do we want to do, because they're not always the same. Okay. And I've certainly found in the last 6 months, I don't think I've traveled less in the last 30 years, but I've certainly been at work almost every day, frankly, almost every day, including the weekends, and it feels a bit less like working from home and a bit more like living at work, to be honest. But how we get that balance right, how we get more things coming to us, maybe more deliveries at home, less trips to retail, and more working, as George is doing, remotely, but in a very connected way, I think it's the pattern of trips that's got to change.
But there's a big push, of course, right now to get people going back to the office, to get people to start to, I suppose, get back to what what we call as a normal life. But I mean, how do you see the future? The future, as far as I can hear from what you're saying, is probably not going to be back to normal.
I have my doubts. I mean, I think there's something interesting in the fact that surveys recently showing the tendency of white-collar workers to return to office jobs running at about 75 to 80% going back to the office in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, less than 40% in this country. Now, I think there's a big London effect there. Having been into our office in central London, I think a lot of people are thinking very hard about that 90 minutes there and back, morning and night, which wasn't always the best part of the day for them, quite apart from the fact they might be saving quite a bit of money not doing that. And they might be tempted to look at some of the villages in England's economic heartland and be thinking, I could live there. I'm only going to go into my office maybe once or twice a fortnight, so I'll put up with a longer travel to go in occasionally for the benefits that I would get of having perhaps a more rural location, a bigger garden, that sort of thing, maybe a shorter trip to school when we're taking the kids in. So I think there might be some pressures the other way.
That's a point. I mean, just a point made by Neil Middleton on the questions here, Steve. You know, Neil says, to me, it's not a debate about go to work from home or go to the workplace. It's about how do you mix the two, and what is the best choice for your various activities. Concentrate at home, interact in the workplace. I mean, is this? What do you agree?
I couldn't agree more. I think he's absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think that for different businesses, there will be different solutions. For the very small business that I run, the team, we've had a conversation about this. The general view is most of the time people are happier working remotely, but we do want to get together from time to time. And actually, we don't really want to come into the office in dribs and drabs and perhaps one of us on Monday and another one on Tuesday. We'd far rather find ways of getting everyone together once a month. But actually, the rest of the time, what we've done is have far more regular catch-up conversations using technology like this. And I think that many offices, many managers are finding that that was a more efficient way of working for them. It's not going to work for everyone, because let's face it, some people aren't as lucky as us to have nice houses that they could be working from. They're living in shared houses. They might be sitting in a bedroom. Some friends of ours are having to take turns who gets the chair so they could be working on the laptop. So it won't work for everyone. But I think that mixed pattern, that's really where we're heading.
We've heard a lot about the challenge of hitting net zero targets. I'm going to put that question via Alex Poppleton, actually, who sent a question in saying, Steve, how do we get affluent baby boomers from buying 4x4 SUVs are having a big impact on the environmental damage. Can the RAC run a campaign, or the RAC Foundation, I imagine it means, run a campaign to make them aware of the damage they're doing? Can you also include their campaign against idling? I presume it means car engine idling and not fossil idling.
We've previously supported the government campaign, which was rather aptly titled "Idling Gets You Nowhere," and we certainly support local authorities taking a tougher line on that. Certainly people sitting there with their engines running when they shouldn't be, particularly diesel engines, no one's going to support that. I should stress for people on the conference, we're not the breakdown boys, we don't have the orange vans, we're a think tank, so we don't actually do that much by way of public campaigning, but I think we would always encourage people to think about the vehicle that they need, and it's all about choosing the right tool for the job. So I'm moderately sympathetic to people who want to choose a vehicle that they feel is more comfortable and safer, particularly if they're carrying a family around, but to think, do we have to use the same vehicle for every trip? A vast majority of people who own a motor vehicle also own a bicycle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to come to some more questions, but I'm just, Emily, what's your view on campaigning against large 4x4 SUVs? Is it a point that's important, or is it a distraction?
I personally think that we shouldn't be needing to campaign, and we shouldn't be forcing people out of what they want, but we should provide something so much better that they automatically want to choose that. So kind of, you've heard probably about the nudge theories that they're using in the government. So to provide something so seamless and connected and affordable that it kind of seems illogical to use the SUV or private car. And I completely agree with Steve saying the right tool for the job. So everything kind of needs to be tailored in our modern society, and that applies to transport and how we get around.
That goes back to Gemma and your travel because we want to and not because we have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we should discriminate against the vehicle type that anybody has or wishes to use. I think what we need to do is go back to what Emily says and actually provide that autonomy. So, you know, if you need a bigger car to do whatever you want to do this particular week, then that's available to you. And, you know, I very much do promote the autonomous driving world that we wish to seek. I think that would be a really effective use of everybody's time. But I also want to address, you know, Steve's topic about, you know, the accessibility for people to work remotely. If we weren't building bigger roads, and I know that might seem quite sort of controversial to Emily, but if we weren't necessarily, you know, going ahead with planned expenditures and actually start diversifying that budget to really address the levelling up agenda, I think you'll naturally see a net zero carbon achievement quicker anyway. You know, maybe we can change some of the ways in which we no longer need retail establishments and actually create innovation hubs where people could work remotely from them, you know, such things as that. Okay. I think would be a really empowering tool.
Abby, a question for you here. Could Abby be looking at engaging local residents as part of the connectivity studies? Alongside environmental impact is the obvious and gaping hole. Abby.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're really conscious that we want to provide things that residents want, and through engaging with local authorities know their patches, they know the residents in their areas. It's really important to listen to the local authorities and what they think the residents might want. There will be, I think, a time where we will want to talk to the public, and when that is in the studies, I think that needs really careful consideration with partners, and particularly with thinking about visions and what we want for the future. Those are quite maybe some sensitive discussions, so I think those need to happen with the local partners first. But I think there's definitely a point where we don't want to be delivering things that people don't want. So I think yes, that's a really good point.
A question for David Sprunt, actually, building on that. People's side is very important. Lockdown has shown how the trend to smaller homes, flats these days don't facilitate working from home very well. I think that's perhaps a point you made, Steve. We need not just good internet access, but well-designed homes that allow space for working from home, or neighbourhoods that provide facilities built in where people can easily go to work. Who wants to take that? Emily, what do you think? Do you recognise this reality that not everyone can work from home?
I completely recognise it in my day-to-day life, and I think sometimes as younger people we're kind of penny pinching to what do we have, but I think we can kind of push that back to our employers, and our employers promise to look after us, and one of Skanska's values is like care for life. So we can kind of push it back and have the conversation with them and how things can work. And I think just by simply flagging the issue to those who are meant to be looking out for us and who are looking out for us, we can hopefully see some change there. But I completely recognise the issue.
Steve?
I think we've got, well, I think all of our homes could probably be better designed, but also I think there's some interesting ideas about places like WeWork and other companies that provide flexible working space, where they've been very busily investing away from areas we've traditionally thought of them being. So I walk past a couple in central London normally on the way to my office, but they've been opening up in other places, smaller towns or on the edge of town. And I think if people haven't got the capacity to work easily from home, making it possible for them to work remotely, but not necessarily from home, is another part of the solution.
Okay, I've been swamped now. It's a great swamp with questions. Edward Lee, this is one for you, George. Satellite backhaul has high latency, creates problems for comms over IP, Zoom, VoIP, other interactive digital tools. George, is that an acceptable compromise?
Well, it depends on actually the satellite network you're going to use. So, so you're absolutely right. The traditional geostationary satellites that we know and have seen in operation for many years do have a significant latency, which can impact IP connectivity. That's absolutely correct. If you look at the new LEO constellations that are being launched at the moment, OneWeb, SpaceX, etc., they're lower, albeit much lower latency, and therefore it should be far more impressive experience. So certainly when I was at OneWeb, so I'm a former OneWebber, we were looking at we were testing latencies of sub 30 milliseconds. So for remote working, that should be absolutely sufficient. And they're very high capacity, high speed networks. So it will absolutely certainly help towards pushing that in the right direction.
Okay, one for everyone, and maybe start with Abby. Question from Matt Thompson. If people are going to opt not to commute every day and work from home, what does the panel think communities of the future will look like? Will everyone want to live in a detached house with a garden? And how will that impact the local sustainability of communities? Abby?
Yeah, I think current situation has made people think about what they're doing with their lives a little bit, but our transport strategy has a really strong focus on place as well. So how can we make good places, design good places where you've got infrastructure that connects people to services? So this is a really important, and some of the talk so far has been on people's choices and giving them different options. So we've really also been thinking about the types of people we have in the Heartland, using some data to look at the types of people personas we have, and what their propensity to change, work from home, are they likely to do that, and really bringing that into some of our work to try and provide the right solutions for the right area for the people we've got in our area as well, because they're very different between the centre of Oxford to some of the rural locations that we have within the Heartland, so providing the right solutions for those areas for the right people is going to be quite important.
Okay. Another question from Joe Burns. It says, I agree we should be providing the place that provides the way for people to live without the need to make commutes or move goods further than they need to be moved. But he says we must do more than just satellite and broadband or the metro elite saving of time on one commute. Emily, do you have a vision for what the place of the future might look like?
Yeah, I think the place of the future would have it would be really well designed, and I think the same principles would apply, that it would be like holistic, intelligent and iterative. So if it's noting that passenger movements aren't as fluid as it could be, perhaps it needs to create the street furniture and to provide for that. So it's kind of looking at the whole life of the journey and the whole day-to-day life of the person. So is the street furniture not there? So have they not got somewhere to lock their bike? Have they not got somewhere to walk to in a nice environment? So yeah, I think it would think about everything.
Gemma, building on that, a question from Sukhbinder Ubi. The pandemic has given rise to a chance for real behaviour change. Yeah. How is this achieved? How this is achieved is the real question. Gemma, do you know how? You got a view about how to achieve this behaviour change?
Yeah, I think you have to understand people's barriers and why they don't want to work from home, or what's actually preventing them from doing so. And it is about behaviour change. You know, the idea of, you know, when the pandemic first hit, you know, I don't mind sharing that I had that nervous chat with my line manager about being stuck inside the four walls for the next foreseeable. It certainly didn't fill me with joy, but we learn to adapt, and we always have done as humans. It's one of the best strengths that we do adapt. We just need to make sure that it's fair and it's an agile environment. And I love the idea that Emily said, you know, we're very much about that sort of dynamic travel, the idea that your entire place morphs to the requirements it needs every single day, which is changeable. And I also wanted to go back about, you know, the planning of the houses as well. The houses that we erected back in the 1980s were for those requirements back then. And of course, today's requirements are going to change even more so. But I think one thing that's really key is to bring in, and I do agree with this, net carbon zero within transport infrastructure too. It's something we should all be factoring every single minute of our lives. But I think working from home is just a part of everyday journey now. It's just what you do.
Question though, point from Kathy Keeler. Young children often do not like people working from home as they feel it is in competition with their protection. Is that where are you on that, Gemma? Is there a conflict of family needs?
So I haven't had an 8-year-old stuck by my side for the last 6 months. There has been conflict, but I actually really have enjoyed the fact that we can, you know, become quite succinct with our education, with our work, and with our living life. You know, we'd often take a break and go on walks together. We'd often make sure that, you know, I'm more aware of what she's doing on the laptop and more aware of what she's learning about, and actually becoming more educated myself about children's requirements than I would have ever had the opportunity to do in post-COVID, pre-COVID world.
Okay, a couple of quick questions before we break for a quick coffee break. Benjamin Boreham, Steve, could there be scope for converting existing cars to hydrogen electric rather than scrapping them and buying another one?
Yes, there is some scope. There's a rather, for those of you who are into that sort of thing, there's a rather entertaining program on the television at the moment called Vintage Voltage, where a company is converting any number of classic and older vehicles, including a Royal Enfield motorbike, which they did in a recent episode. At the moment, it's an expensive process. Let's not make any bones about it, but it is something alongside hydrogen where I could certainly see people who want a particular style of vehicle might well be willing to pay the extra to have that, but to have that with the zero tailpipe option.
Okay. Final question, and I'll put this probably, I think, to Abby. I think Abby, is the big answer to return to a mixed development, residential workplace, rather than zoning in planning? I suppose. Does EEH and its planning need to sort of rethink the way that communities actually are developing to actually embrace this kind of mixture between residential, perhaps increasing the encouraging more of a development in urban areas?
Yeah, I think we've in our transport strategy really outlined the fact that planning and transport need to work together to create good places. Obviously, if you've got planning and transport working together, you can create places where you've got almost best of both worlds. I think working with our local planning authorities is really the way forward in terms of them also helping to decide what the future is for their environments. So I think you've got to bring in planning and transport together because the two work as one. To think about how to create those places to provide good outputs for the areas.
Abby, George, Gemma, Steve, and Emily, thanks so much there for a great panel session. And thanks very much to everybody on the line for some brilliant questions. Sorry if I didn't get to all of them. There are a large number coming in. They're flicking through my screen very quickly, and I'm trying to get to as many as I can. If I haven't got to one of your questions yet, then do resend it and make me aware of it. But I'm trying to get through them all. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us there for that session. We're going to have a quick 10-minute, put the kettle on, have a cup of coffee. I've actually got some coffee here, which I'm working my way through, but I'll go and refill it, I think. So have a 10-minute break. We're going to be back at 11:30 and not a second beyond that. So have a 6-minute break. And we'll be back with a session theme for innovations in delivery. Thanks again, George, Gemma, Emily, Abby, Steve, for joining me there. And we'll see you back here in 6 minutes' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, well, I'm not sure whether we are, I think we're back now. Yes, I believe we are back now. It's 11:30, and I think we're ready to start again. I hope you enjoyed the first session, and we got through quite a lot of content, which is good. And I hope certainly if you gave me some questions that I managed to get to answering those questions. So I will certainly keep my eye on what's going on with the questions as they come in. We've got lots and lots of questions which I know that I haven't tackled, so I will try and pick them up as we go to them throughout the rest of the afternoon. Right, our next session is all about innovation in delivery, and we've got a number of quick presentations followed again by some questions from the floor and some questions from me. So let's start getting a view from Transport for Buckinghamshire and the team led by Dave Stewart, Network Delivery Manager. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Dave is also going to be joined by Keith Carpenter, Technical Director. Dave, over to you to underline the opportunities you see for turning data into intelligence with the aim of delivering better transport solutions where they're needed. Dave.
Certainly. Morning all, and thanks for the invitation to speak. Dave Stewart, Construction Manager for Ringway Jacobs in Buckinghamshire and lead for our National Road AI Development Project in conjunction with Vasala, who is one of our service providers. In late 2019, we set out plans for all of our clients nationally to become involved in a pretty fast-moving development to determine real-time road condition using artificial intelligence. It interprets data collected using a standard mobile phone, which is mounted in any vehicle, and it travels at normal speeds on the network. So effectively, any vehicle we want to mount a phone in can be used for data collection. This potentially can provide the future model for highway maintenance, we think, and for future data use across authorities. Efficiency gains, cost savings, service improvements are all in the mix here. How are we going to do that? Well, more efficient data collection and management. We use non-specialist tools, we use non-specialist personnel, and it provides data that's usable, consistent, accurate, and auditable, and importantly, current. Minimal collection costs, though limited basically only to the vehicle resources we've got available. We have open live time reporting, and we can determine work programs from live data rather than historical data. And we remove subjectivity from the network through use of inspectors and going to computer models instead. What you see on the screen there is the process at work. That would normally run as a video, smooth video. I think buffering has got it as a series of stills is probably what you're seeing. Everything you're seeing there is automatic. There's no human involvement at all. The computer is undertaking pretty much thousands of calculations each second. It's determining the condition of all the assets it recognizes on the network. All those colored marks you see on the carriageway there are the computer recognizing and determining severity of different types of defects, so potholes, cracking, rutting, etc., etc. It's picking them all up and it's determining severity as well. Features such as cars and pedestrians, you'll notice, are fully anonymized, so we stay within data protection protocols, etc. Important. The computer learns to interpret these features into defect and condition data. Every time the vehicle travels along the road, it does that. So it can identify change, and it can identify trends, and it can identify deterioration trending, which is very important for us. The scope of use, to be honest, is extraordinary. It's got me excited, and very few things do normally. The initial aim is to replicate and advance what we call CVI, course visual inspection data. That's what we use as the basis for our technical information on carriageway condition and deterioration, especially on local roads at the minute. And it informs our programs of preventative maintenance. Collection at the minute before this is slow. It's manual. It means intervention can occur many months, possibly even years after we identify deterioration in the first instance. What Road AI does is it makes that process real time, and it enables us to take decisions today using data collected today in order to inform our maintenance programs. That's a phenomenal step forward, and it's something that's got us really excited. Ringway Jacobs have determined a host of other uses, some of which I'll just fly through. So sign surveys, the system can identify consistency of signing. So if we're doing safety route strategies and we haven't got a consistency, the system will tell us where those inconsistencies are. Drainage prioritization, it will highlight standing water. It will recognize repeat standing water on repeat survey, and it'll highlight that to us so we can do something about it immediately. The holy grail is really the auto classification of individual defects. If we can get to a position where the computer can prompt us for our priority defect repairs rather than a human having to interpret the subjective area, then that's a massive step forward. It's not there yet. We have a little challenge in convincing the courts to rely on a computer rather than a human intervention, but we're as close as we've ever been, and that's quite exciting to us. I could go on forever about the things that this thing can do, but I'll stop there because I know I've got 5 minutes and no more.
Well, Dave, just before you disappear, I mean, you're currently using this approach for collecting carriageway condition and inventory data. I mean, what future uses do you see for the technology?
It's, oops, sorry, paper's fallen over. It's almost limitless, depending what one used for it. We've always had a lot of data as highway authorities. The difficulty has always been interpreting it intelligently and using it efficiently. Now that we've got a computer to do the hard work for us, to do all the analysis, that creates space for the personnel, so we can concentrate on solution delivery, we can concentrate on customer service. So we can use the data that the computer is giving us and the intelligence that the computer is giving us to actually concentrate on putting solutions on the network. So across all of our range of assets, there is probably a use for this data in every single instance. I'll just to throw some other ones in there. Lining surveys, traditionally expensive. The computer can do that for us. Street lighting scouting, traditionally very, very monotonous and manually done. The computer can do that for us. Asset value trending. We can determine the value of our asset. We can learn whether the asset is depreciating or increasing. All of these things are opened up by the use of this data intelligence.
And what about making it available to the public? Is that something you're considering?
Potentially. There's no reason why it can't be. It's held in the cloud. The data is held in the cloud. The data is accessible through a web-based platform. So it could be made available to the public. I sometimes get slightly cautious about doing such things. So like anything, if we make data available to the public, we'd have to explain what that data is and what they're actually looking at and how it is used and how we can express the limitations of what we can do each year, budget-wise, et cetera, et cetera. But potentially, yes, we could use this to really emphasize our education to the public about what we do and how we do it and what the priorities might be.
Presumably it means the end of highway inspectors as a career.
No. It means that we can probably use our highway inspectors differently. So we'll remove them from the hazardous activity of being out in a live traffic environment. We'll remove them from the monotonous, repetitive data interpretation activity, but there will still be the people who will have to actually make decisions about what we do and when we do it, and they'll have to communicate that to people so they can have much more time to react to customer concerns, they can have much more time to communicate with stakeholders, they can have much more time to do valuable things rather than monotonous data interpretation.
And obviously it does look like a very powerful system, but and you've told us about what it can do. Anything it can't do? Anything you've been struggling for it to actually identify? Any asset types or any kind of condition types which you're really struggling with at the moment?
Well, we've only been using it for 9, 10 months at the minute, so we're still learning as we go. But it's camera based, so it can only see what we can see. It can't, for example, look at underground pipework. It can't very well determine blocked gullies. It can't search around in the verge for manhole covers and things like that. So it will have its limitations, but as far as visual is concerned, the way the technology is now, the computer can pretty much identify anything that the human eye can identify, maybe not quite in so much detail. So there'll still be a requirement for inspectors to go and verify certain aspects that the computer picks up.
Well, look, Dave, stay with us because I'm going to come back to you in a few moments' time to talk about, I suppose, innovation and getting innovation into the sector more generally. But thanks very much for sharing that fantastic system. And I imagine that you will be available to answer further questions after the conference with anyone who wants to hear a bit more about what you've got going on there.
I'll stick around for a while.
I'm going to move rapidly on. Dave, stay with us for this next session. Got another couple of speakers lined up, and Hannah, if you just joined us, and also Hannah, give us a wave. And Ed Godzif also is joining us from Skanska's Sustainability Manager. Hannah Probert, you are a carbon consultant with WSP. Hannah, you're going to look at achieving carbon neutrality. We've heard a lot this morning already about the challenge of achieving net zero in terms of emissions, but I think you're going to talk to us a bit more about actually looking at carbon neutrality actually in the delivery of projects. So Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Before I go into it, I just wanted to be clear on what carbon neutrality is. I'm sure most of you are aware, but essentially it's achieved by balancing carbon emissions with carbon removal, or simply eliminating carbon emissions altogether. And also, just to confirm, I use carbon as a shorthand for carbon dioxide emissions specifically, and it's sometimes used as the shorthand for greenhouse gas emissions, as it's the most predominant greenhouse gas emission. The majority of local authorities within England's economic heartland have declared a climate emergency, which is great to see, and they've introduced targets to achieve carbon neutrality. With the most common target being to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So with targets like this in place, local authorities need to monitor emissions within their area to understand the progress that's being made. And there's a couple of publicly available sources to access annual emissions data, with the main source being from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Here, total emissions for local authorities within the UK are reported per industry sector. So the transport emissions are then split down further by road and rail type, and this data is annually released up until our current year. Another source for local authority emissions data is via a tool called SCATR, which stands for Setting City Area Targets and Trajectories for Emissions Reduction. SCATR makes use of the BEIS data, and as it says in the title, SCATR enables high-level forecast of emissions to be calculated up to 2050. And using this tool, measures to reduce emissions can be identified. The methodology behind these emissions sources uses traffic data, including kilometres travelled, fleet composition data, fuel consumption and associated emission factors, which is great to use to make a high-level estimate of annual emissions and then forecast emissions based on this data. However, this data doesn't enable local authorities to analyse where very specific hotspots arise, for example, the time of day where emissions are highest or on certain types of road. This type of information is required to ensure that emission reduction measures are introduced in areas where the biggest reductions can be achieved and at the earliest opportunity. And so to analyse emissions by local authority in more detail, a bottom-up calculation methodology is required, which considers a wide variety of variables, including changes in population, emissions by time of day, changes in vehicle composition, and potential increases in flexible working, which is very relevant. In conclusion, it's really encouraging to see that England's economic heartland has undertaken this type of carbon assessment in their Pathways to Decarbonisation technical report, which supports the transport strategy. And this assessment used the NISMOD transport model, which is the National Infrastructure Systems model. So using this, England's economic heartland can make very specific forecasts, which can then inform more meaningful transport strategy measures to achieve carbon reductions within their set timeframes. Yeah, sorry.
Hannah, just to, before I hand it, I hear a perspective from Ed. I mean, one of the things we hear a lot about when it comes to driving lower carbon, increased sustainability, is the need for clients to drive the process. I mean, to what extent is England's economic heartland really kind of like moving the dial in terms of what you really want to see changing in terms of the way that carbon is reduced?
Yeah, well, I think that to be honest, England's economic heartland is making significant progress by the fact that, like I said, most of them have declared a climate emergency and have set these quite ambitious targets of achieving carbon neutrality beyond the 2050 target for the UK. And they've got quite ambitious transport strategies in place to enable these reductions to be made earlier than the 2050 target.
Okay, I've got a question from Alex Poppleton. You know, what would you say are the worst culprits when it comes to emissions in terms of transport?
Well, probably the road networks, far worse than rail, coaches and buses, purely down to the number of vehicles that are on them and the speeds that they're travelling at.
Okay. So as a consultant, you'd back the MP's Greg Smith's comments this morning about the expressway, the lack of need for it.
Right. Well, yeah, limiting the number of new road developments would be a good way to start. Yeah.
That sounds like you heard it here first. Hannah, thanks very much. I'm going to come back with a few more general points about the innovations in the sector. But first, before that, let me introduce Ed Godsliff. Ed is Skanska's sustainability manager, and I suppose taking on from where you are, Hannah, in terms of the impacts in design. Ed, talk to us about how we can actually achieve carbon reductions during construction. Ed.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was going to touch on a couple of points for the contractor side of things, or the construction side of things. The infrastructure carbon review set out how to reduce carbon and cost during construction activities and development, and that was around build nothing, build less, build clever, and build efficiently. And obviously, when it comes to construction, the last two of these are really the focus area. The challenge is obviously a lot of infrastructure development uses concrete, steel, asphalt, which are quite carbon intense materials. And where we're seeing innovations come into the industry now is around low carbon versions of those. So we've got things like SEM-free, which is a concrete product with 80% less carbon in it. But what we tend to do is trial it on a small section of one project, learn something from it, positive or otherwise, and then move on and trial something again slightly different on another project. What we're working really hard to do within the industry is to collaborate better and bring all of these things together so that they become business as usual. So we're starting to see a shift towards, for example, low temperature asphalt, which has significant carbon savings as being cost neutral. We're also seeing things like the 50% recycled content trial on the M25 recently, which when you think about those in the context of the UK's road network, we've got some really exciting opportunities there. And taking a circular economy approach, we're starting to sort of, I suppose, bring those concepts into how we operate and produce low carbon recycled products locally. But where we need a bit better collaboration perhaps is where we've got the construction industry, we've got house builders alongside us, we've got small SMEs, we've got the supply chain, and we all we need to start to work together to recycle those materials into different uses, not just within the same sector that they've been recycled in. And whole life carbon and cost as a concept, as an approach, is seeing some real benefits as well. We've seen the first use of graphene asphalt last year in Oxford as an example, which, yes, it costs more upfront, but over a 20-year lifespan, it's predicted to save 70% carbon and cost savings as well. And that sort of approach, when we're talking about the whole life of an asset, will bring some significant savings. Another area of innovation for the construction industry is around digital tools. So we see things like 6D BIM with cost, carbon, and program built into the models, which allow really cool value engineering around carbon to be undertaken. And that's been really successful in some of the major projects like HS2, for example, but also things like drones, digital survey tools. We're starting to see now complete digital twin sites being created that allow particularly the complex lifting movements or structures to be practiced, and when you get to site, you're therefore delivering it very efficiently and safely, which obviously has cost and carbon implications as well. And then when we get to site, some of the things that are starting to come through, which are quite exciting, around electric plant and vehicles. They're in their infancy, but they don't always work in every situation. But we are seeing some of those being developed, and we're seeing over in Europe, for example, complete electric sites, which are saving huge amounts of carbon, 98% in one example that I've seen. We've seen autonomous vehicles being used on the A14, and that will start to become mainstream. We need to find the right use for these things, obviously. But we also have stopgap solutions. So where where suitable examples don't exist, we have things like HVO diesel, which is a renewable diesel product, which will work within existing plant machinery and fleet, and it saves 90%, 95% carbon. So, and that's there currently. And if we work as an industry and start to use this more, we can reduce the cost of that. And the red diesel subsidy obviously disappears in 18 months' time. We're seeing zero carbon compounds. They've been cost effective in a lot of situations now for about 2 years. They will be the cheapest option. So they should be the go-to way of setting up a project. And finally, I just want to touch on what's coming down the line in the Environment Bill next year around biodiversity net gain. And not only can we make use, or we need to sort of fully embrace those concepts, and it will be mandatory for a lot of developments, we can deliver positive outcomes for the natural environment, for local communities, road transport users, but also producing better quality habitats. We can start to use those in terms of carbon sequestration as well, so delivering multiple benefits for the same outcome.
Okay, Ed, I mean, really great opportunities, but I suppose the reality is this sector is incredibly entrenched in its ways in terms of using the same materials, using the same approaches, and using the same, I suppose, techniques. I mean, yes, certainly connected autonomous plant is very much a reality as far as the Highways England's concerned, and a lot of the industry infrastructure carbon review has been a driver for changing behaviour across the industry. As you mentioned, BIM, digital twins. There are always some very early adopters, and there is a small number of businesses which leaves a very, very long tail that really isn't very engaged. How do we get that long tail engaged?
I think there's well, so it'll be a bit of push and pull. I think some of these things will come through policy change. So, like I said, that you know, things like the change in tax regimes around red diesel will prompt quite a big shift towards bits of kit and vehicles that perhaps were seen as too expensive or not quite suitable for the activities we do. So there'll be some actions like that which will happen. I think the rest of it is around collaboration. I think there's a big role for strong leadership from clients, local authorities, Highways England, and working with the major contractors to bring the rest of the supply chain with us. And I think I'm often surprised by how knowledgeable and engaged the smaller companies are. They might not have the opportunities to invest in the latest vehicles and all the rest of it, but their knowledge and understanding and their willingness to engage in terms of carbon reductions is definitely there.
But Dave, it takes quite a lot of energy and a lot of resource and a lot of money to invest in the sort of systems that you described earlier, Dave. I mean, it's not accessible to many, is it?
It does, but I think if we have an innovation that's worthwhile pursuing, such as the one that I've been talking about today, then it's well worth certainly investing in seeing how far we can make that go. I mean, so one of the things that we're talking about, the environmental areas at the minute, one of the things that I've been talking about, as well as the cost saving, the environmental benefit from intervening at the right time with the right solution in the highway maintenance sector is quite phenomenal when we consider that a conventional surfacing scheme, how many tons of material gets removed from the road when we do a conventional surfacing scheme. If we can turn one of those conventional surfacing schemes into a surface treatment scheme, basically an overlay, a thin surface on the top, we're saving a phenomenal amount of carbon emissions just through doing that one. We do 50 or 60 conventional schemes a year.
Okay. Ed, just before I move on to our Matthew, our next speaker, do you see, as a question here from Ken Hutt, do you see the sharing of trial data between contractors improving to speed up the approval of innovative solutions becoming business as usual?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key, because we perhaps traditionally have worked in silos. So we'll trial a product, and everyone else will trial a product, and we don't learn from it, because you learn from the failures as much as successes, and it's about using products in the right situations. And I think we can definitely get better at that. And I think that there's a massive opportunity, because I mentioned SEM-free earlier. It pops up on every award that I see that someone submitted a use of SEM-free, and it will win an award. But so we know these products work, and if we could share the trial data across all those different uses, we could start from a point where we can overcome the reticence to look differently at specifications and standards, and sort of see where the risk sits and things like that. So I think there is a big opportunity for that. And I think it needs broader collaboration around the low carbon agenda, and particularly with the new products that are coming through from the suppliers, definitely.
Okay, thanks very much, Ed. Come back with some more questions, more general questions about innovation in a moment. Let me next introduce our next speaker. I'm hoping that Matthew Dashambard, Client Director of Atkins, is here. He's not on the... You are here.
Unfortunately, yes,
You are.
I'm the only speaker. Unfortunately, I'm the poor relation without a fully functioning webcam. But I would caveat that to say, after 6 months working from home, you aren't missing very much by not being able to see me, to be fair.
Well, Matthew, sorry, apologies. I made a complete mess of your surname. You give it a go.
No, that's fine.
Dashambo. You tell me. I can't.
Darshambo. That's it. That's close enough. Darshambo. That's perfect.
Darshambo. Matthew, client director with Atkins, and you're going to outline a partnership approach to the Heartland's connectivity studies. So we can't see you, but we can hear you, Matt.
Fantastic.
The floor
Yeah,
is yours.
it was to give a very brief overview of the quantitative and qualitative exercise that we, as a number of the delivery partners that underpin and support the EEH, went through to come up with the list of connectivity studies that Abby touched on very briefly in her presentation, which is shown on one of the handouts on the right hand side. And really less about the process we went through, but the EEH's real push to develop this community within the Heartland, between both their constituent local authorities, the EEH technical team themselves, and obviously ourselves as delivery partners, be it consultants or contractor partners there. So yeah, it was the exercise that was undertaken was to develop a strategic program of connectivity studies for inclusion within the transport strategy that was published. This was a joint project between EEH and Atkins and Jacobs, employing data and tools assembled by WSP and EEH authorities. And as I said very briefly there, the EEH have been very keen to draw upon skills and expertise in the delivery partner team and the joint expertise on offer. The work was broken down into 4 sections: an agree and assessment methodology, assessment of corridors, moderation of assessments, and a program and sequencing of corridors. It's been really, really keen to have a quantitative exercise and then a qualitative exercise with all partners being able to input into that process. First step was to develop this program of proposed connectivity studies. We undertook a sifting process of corridors against the 4 principles of the transport strategy. Employing that regional evidence base and outputs from opportunity mapping, they were used to inform the identification of indicators to assess these corridors against each principle and develop a high-level understanding of where the connectivity challenges and opportunities present themselves. This allowed us, as that joint technical team of Atkins and Jacobs, to develop a multi-criteria appraisal framework utilizing 17 indicators against the 4 principles of the transport strategy. Each of these principles are treated equally in the appraisal, and whilst the indicators have been given a weighting to reflect the relative importance of each indicator is seeking to achieve one of those principles. So the approach to the assessment of each corridor was as follows: confirm the geographic area of interest, focus on districts, drawing on the conclusions from the phase 1 assessment and further refinement of areas, collect data for the districts using the regional evidence base and build understanding of the key issues based on this evidence, use objective criteria and scoring guide to define a proposed score for each indicator, supported by a narrative to explain the key issues and reason for the scoring, review the assessments to ensure internal consistency between the scores, e.g. between car mode split, traffic flow and CO2 per capita under the net zero principle. Internal review and challenge in each of the assessment teams, followed by moderation by the other team, and then moderation of corridor assessments and sequencing by the project team, including Atkins, Jacobs and EEH, and then finally overall scoring and prioritization sequencing of the corridors. So we were very keen to ensure we had a framework and a quantitative exercise, a really robust approach that we could then present to the EEH officers group for moderation and assessment. So following the completion of these assessments by each team, the assessments were moderated by the other team to ensure consistency in approach. A 2-step approach was taken to the assessments. The first step used the indicators to prioritize the corridors based on their performance against the 4 principles. From this, the strongest performing 13 of the 20 corridors were taken forward for the sequencing process. This sequencing process was the sort of final part of the technical assessment, was based upon trigger points that existed in the corridor using existing evidence on housing growth and forecasted capacity constraints on the highway network. And I think it came back to a point earlier that where Abby received a question around where was that sort of local input able to be applied. And I think this was the point where we were able to apply some of that qualitative input around well, what could work and what couldn't work in certain corridors. I say this assessment was carried out for all corridors based upon the immediacy of the need rather than the greatest need. Further examination of the geography of the sequence corridors indicate there could be some scope for rationalisation of the studies in areas where the corridors overlap, offer the potential to interact with corridors in the TFSE boundary to the south or potentially the Midlands connect to the north. we were really keen to make sure we rationalise these studies as far as possible. As I say, it wasn't solely a very dry quantitative assessment. We wanted to make sure we married the quantitative and qualitative assessment.
Matt, thank you very much. One of the things I was going to, you talk a lot about collaboration. You talk about the need to symbiotic relationships. It's hard, isn't it? We talked about it earlier. Get cross-border cooperation and getting those kind of relationships to work. How are you doing it?
Absolutely. I think it's really testament to the approach in the EEH and really driving this delivery partner on this really collaborative forum that they've tried to drive since inception, really bringing, as I say, the individual authorities, bringing them forward into this forum, bringing each of their own, as ourselves in Atkins being a delivery partner with Swindon, be it Jacobs, WSP, be it a number of contractors in Ringway Jacobs, Skanska or Volker Highways, bringing these groups into this forum where we can say, look, we understand the whole should be greater than the sum of its parts. This is our aspiration as the EEH. These are some of the points and opinions of our constituent partners. How does that resonate with industry? What are you doing elsewhere, be it with other SNTBs or other authorities? How can we get to some of the outcomes that we're after by really harnessing this partnership approach between the public and private sector? So yeah, it's really testament to people like Naomi and Abby and Martin, really keen to make sure we do all leave our hats at the door, as we say, when we come together into these forums, and really make sure we are all driving in the same direction.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Come back to you if we've got time at the end for some questions. Let me move rapidly on to Sean Thomas. Sean, talking about the collaborations, Sean is embedded in the Heartland as Network Improvement Manager with Ringway Jacobs. Sean, you're going to outline the implementation of active travel initiatives, particularly what you've done during the COVID-19 crisis. Sean.
Yeah, hi, hello, thank you. First, I just want to say that it's amazing that we've all come together on this, and it feels like we're all reiterating the same, but it's fantastic to realise that we are all like-minded people, all trying to make the best of this opportunity that we've been given. And yeah, my involvement with active travel, working for Ringway Jacobs in Buckinghamshire with Buckinghamshire Council, has been different in that it's not different in the terms of the work that we do. It's just the pace that we've had to work at, and the just going that extra mile to work together to take or to try to take the general public with us. And it is, as we've all said, and I won't reiterate it too much, but it is important to say that this is the biggest in terms of changing the way that we travel and doing what we can during our watch, if you like, for to look after our planet and everything else. This is the greatest opportunity that we could have ever been landed with. We've literally been given the opportunity to leap forward. Good knows how many years. I don't think anybody can put a time scale on it. And we need to seize that opportunity. And all the great things that we've been talking about, collaboration and at all different levels. I just want to give you a couple of examples of how we've been doing that at a very local level. And it sounds straightforward, but it's making a difference. We're working with Buckinghamshire Council, very good relationship with that client, and they have split up the activities, if you like, of delivering active travel to almost like a who does what best. And so whereas Ringway Jacobs will have taken on the design and implementation for the council, and the council have concentrated on the DFT interface and the political and client interface, working together so that there's no man marking, there's no grey areas, and there's no double handling. And I think that is a good example of collaboration and how to make light work of the challenge that we've got to deal with. Thank you.
Sean, thank you very much. I mean, to what extent do you think we heard a lot about it this afternoon? You mentioned it just now, sorry, this morning. Digital technologies and the ability to transform the sector and the Heartland's plans. I mean, to what extent do you think that's going to be a reality, Sean?
I'm by far not the expert in this field, but I do know that there is so many, just listening to the roads that Dave Stewart just talked us through, it is almost like already a huge leap into the future of this innovation that we're seeing. And I think if we can't use that opportunity that we've got and put our heads together and collaborate from top down and bottom up in the way that we've all been speaking about already, we never will get it right. And so I think as professionals, as human beings, this is our time. This is our time to make that difference. And I think we have to just pull out all the stops to do so. And I know there will be some negative thought that we might go back to the way things were, and that all this innovation, yeah, it's great, but it's not really going to make a massive difference. But I think we need to dispel that and make sure that we educate those that aren't, lucky enough to sit on these forums and to hear from each other and to share these forums and to actually make it a reality.
Okay, let's take some. So we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to romp through some of those. To Hannah and Ed, I think, and maybe to Matt. The strategy fails to, this is from Chris Todd, the strategy fails to show how it will meet net zero, as all scenarios show traffic increase when we need a minimum of 20% traffic reduction. How can we change this, as we don't have time to carry on as usual, even for a few years? Hannah.
Well, I take this back to using our carbon models to see where the emissions are and where we can make the most significant reductions, because I completely agree that if it's showing that there needs to be a decrease in traffic, then we should be directing the measures towards reducing emissions in those areas. But we can't do that unless we know exactly where those hotspots are. And to do that, we need to constantly be monitoring them.
Okay. I mean, following up there, there's a question that says, is the target of 2050 soon enough for climate change? Do we need 2030 or sooner? Do we need to be really accelerating these kind of changes?
As soon as possible, I'd say.
Ed?
Yeah.
Well, I think a number of the clients we work for as Skanska local authorities have a 2030 target, which is not that long away, 9.5 years away, and that includes the services that we provide them. So that is a massive challenge, and even if they're not successful by 2030, what we learn on the journey over the next 9 years will be hugely beneficial, and it will hopefully bring some of those that are at 2050 forward a bit. And I think we will only see things being brought forward. The pace of change in the industry is remarkable. We were talking about things, say, 2-3 years ago as being 10-15 years away, and we see them today. And obviously the impact of coronavirus in terms of home working and changes in our view of the office and things like that, it's just accelerated things. So I'm constantly surprised by that. So 2030, it seemed pretty ambitious last year, but Nottingham, for example, is 2028, and they're well on the way. We're doing all sorts of exciting things. So okay. I think 2050 will start to look too far quite soon.
Question for Dave. A lot of people loved your presentation and your technology, Dave. Can it be used to access cleansing requirements, litter, below litter and leaf fall, is what Simon Bowers asks. Can the system be used to access cleaning below litter and leaf fall?
In theory, yes. It's not an area we've looked at yet, but as long as it's something that can be recognised by a camera or by an eye travelling along a network, then it can be used to collect data and prompt maintenance. So okay. An interesting one, which I'll note down straight away, and we'll add it to the ever-increasing list of things that it might be possible to use it for.
Slightly wider, and something I may be touching what I was talking to Sian about. What role do you see data playing in driving the future network management? That's from Richard Ward Jones.
Like I said before, I mean, we've always had data. The problem has been we've had too much data and not enough time to use it, or not enough ways to use it effectively. If we can get data that is intelligent so that we can actually utilize it to prompt the right priorities in the right places at the right times, which is what this system helps us to do, then we'll be able to step forward. Until we get to that position, and we're still crunching a load of data every year and then eventually getting out on site to react to that data, then we'll be slow in moving forward.
Matt, if you're still there, maybe Sean, you can comment as well. Victoria Jersaba says, we need more car disincentives like workplace parking level to support public transport now more than ever. Is this something which in your connectivity studies you've looked at, Matt?
Yeah, I think Abby made the point earlier. It's certainly looking at that holistic transport system. And certainly, I think as the point's been made, it might be a bit of an oxymoron, but how can we harness the benefits of coronavirus, those more local trips? There's certainly a lot more conversations now around 15, or depending when you're reading, 15 or 20-minute neighborhoods. People are working a lot more locally. There is an opportunity to lock in, as I say, some of these benefits to drive forward some of our carbon commitments, or looking at a totally different. So yeah, I think it's always, I'm always slightly hesitant to always look at sticks over carrot. But as I say, we seem to have a different palette of opportunities, or a different palette of measures we can employ. So I think, yeah, we certainly can look. But I think, as I say, what's happened over the last 6 months, rather than it be more about, to put it bluntly, bashing motorists, I think it's about harnessing some of these different mode choices, or basically where people are now looking to live, work and spend their money. It's harnessing some of those benefits, as I say, something as terrible as coronavirus has brought.
Well, Sean, another thing which is we've seen, of course, is more home deliveries and more people shopping at home and rather than going to the shop. So there's a question here from Alex Poppleton: are logistics really paying their fair share for the environmental damage? Would bigger taxes on logistics make a difference? What's your view on that? Our change post-COVID to home delivery?
I think, well, we're all seeing it. I see it in and out of the close that I live in, and I think people I speak to have said that it's not that they're scared of going to the shops anymore. It's not that they're scared of going out and staying safe. It's just because they found it was a change that they found was useful and it worked for them, so they might stay with it. I don't think we'll know the answer to that, but I think putting disincentives on that would be wrong, because at the same time we're trying to balance the economy and trying to keep all these businesses going. It would be wrong to try and make it difficult for those businesses to keep operating. But I think one of the things we can do is and I know others have already mentioned it lots, is to create more incentives for people to choose the bike or your feet over the car, and to put that infrastructure and facilities in place. And one last thing on it is to take the car drivers with us, because not everybody is, I don't think we're quite yet there in educating, I hate using that word, but to educating those people that aren't involved in the sectors that we work in, and to explain to them what we're trying to do for the greater good. And I think if they understood the bigger picture of why we're trying to disadvantage the car user, they might be a bit more lenient towards us, and they might be more understanding of the measures we're trying to introduce.
Sean, thank you very much. We're bang out of time, so I'm going to draw a conclusion to this innovation section. Huge amount of opportunity there going for the industry if we can really work together to collaborate to embrace the kind of technologies Dave showed us, that Ed explained and Hannah described, etc. So thank you very much for my panel. To Matt, you couldn't see, but you heard. Sean, Ed, Hannah, and Dave for joining us there. We are going to move rapidly into our final session now. And by the way, there's, I'm sure, lots of information that you can get. There's a lot of people wanting more information about Dave's technology, etc. So get a hold of him via the conference, and I'm sure that we'll be able to direct you towards that. So thanks very much to the panel. We're going to move now to our last final theme for the day, which is about looking at some transformational projects that are going on around the area. And we're going to hear from 4 presentations about 4 different issues. We're going to hear about some work from Sustrans. Matthew Barber is going to join us. Lee Galloway from Highways England is going to talk to us about the Black Cat improvements. Mayor James Palmer from Cambridgeshire is going to talk to us about autonomous metro. But first, Rob Brighouse. Welcome, Rob. I believe you are in the wings. Rob, chair of East West Railway Company, a project you heard a little bit about earlier on when Emily talked to us about the work she was doing as a graduate engineer. But Rob, chair of East West Railway, what is the project all about? Where are we at the moment? Rob, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can't see you though. Switch your camera on. I can't see you. I can't. I'd like to see you, Rob. I'd like to see you. We all like to see you. Come on.
Can you see me?
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. There we are. I can see you now. Rob.
Thank you.
Rob, the floor is yours. I'm going to just give us 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to get some questions. I'm sure loads will flood in as you start to speak. So keep it tight, and we will get some questions. So where are we with East West Rail?
Right.
Are we on track? The floor is yours.
Yeah, we are on track. And Anthony, can I just say two things? Firstly, thank you for inviting me to the conference. But secondly, in this sort of post-COVID world, I think the importance of what we're doing on East-West is increasing even further. Greg Smith said it all this morning when he said East-West Rail will be a game changer. It was lovely to hear those words from Greg. And basically, what have we got? We've got a corridor that is a massive contributor to the UK economy already. We've got Oxford and Cambridge with its life sciences, which is so topical just at the moment. We've got Milton Keynes and Cranfield with aerospace, with advanced engineering. And let's be clear, none of these great industries can thrive on home working. People need to travel, people need to visit laboratories, workshops, etc. And so, as Greg said this morning, East West Rail is both transformational and it's essential in maintaining this sort of economic advantage, whilst at the same time maintaining the high quality of life for those who do live on the route and will live on the route. And Anthony, picking up your comment, I was very pleased to listen to Emily this morning, Emily Seabrook, talking about what our customers of the future will want. And she talked about connectivity, she talked about net zero being a factor. And I think in terms of progress, one of the key things about our approach at East West Rail to this project is that we're taking this in a logical order. So we're looking first at outcomes. What do our customers want? What do they want in terms of connectivity? What will they want in the future? And then and only then we're saying, right, what are the operational outputs that we must deliver? Primarily train services that deliver those outcomes. And then last but not least, we're then saying, right, what's the necessary infrastructure to ensure we deliver those outputs and that we deliver them safely, we deliver them cost effectively and reliably, and in an environmentally responsible manner. And that includes, of course, the focus on the first and last mile connectivity. So we're making good progress, and I believe what we're doing is very complementary to the work which James, Terence and Matthew will also outline shortly. I believe we will enable both regeneration and housing development to support the aspirations of those who do and will live on the route. So I think I met my time constraint, Anthony, but that's
brilliant. No, well, so good. I'm going to get straight in there with a question which builds on what we heard earlier. But of course, the impact of the COVID economic downturn is that passenger numbers on the railways they're falling. Is there still a business case for this project?
I think the business case is now even stronger. I would say that, wouldn't I? But basically, our economy needs a boost, and this project brings a number of things. Firstly, there's the work in constructing it, so there are hundreds of jobs created in the construction of the job. But more importantly, it's the point I made earlier that life science takes on a huge significance in our economy. The work that Cranfield is doing on aerospace, they're looking at environmentally friendly solutions. So I think the need for this particular rail project, and I'm not speaking generally, this particular rail project actually increases with COVID, with the effects of COVID, rather than being jeopardized in any way.
There were also some comments earlier this morning about our natural kind of gravitation towards the Grand Projet, whereas which are measured in the billions, whereas millions could be invested in some active travel projects, which would arguably make differences to communities on a greater scale. I mean, are you aware of that? How do you balance that?
And yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with it. So as I said, the speakers who follow will talk about some of those projects. I think that a lot of what we do is complementary. So for example, when I was working at Chiltern, we were opening new parkway stations, but clearly access to those, so road improvements, cycleways, all important factors. So I don't look on it as an either or. I think we're working as a team to deliver the best connectivity to those who do and will live in this corridor.
Rob, well, let's hear from the next member of the team then. Thanks very much. Mayor James, are you there? Can you switch your camera on? Are you there? I'm hoping that Mayor James Palmer, Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is, yes, you are there. Mayor James.
I am here.
Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. You're going to talk to us about the Cambridge Autonomous Metro and, well, you know, I suppose, where does it sit in terms of priorities in the region? James.
Well, I mean, the reality is that the Cambridgeshire economy is one of the very strongest economies outside of London. I think there's us and a little bit of the West Country that pays into the UK Treasury, and everybody else takes. So how we harness that and how we put Cambridge in a position and Cambridgeshire in a position to be internationally competitive over the next 30, 50, 100 years is the test for the politicians of the area, and certainly the test for me. The negative issue around the growth of Cambridge as an economy is that it's happened pretty much within about a 3-mile radius of the city. So all this talk of Silicon Fen is nonsense. I don't think the Cambridge bubble extends into the Fens at all. And my job, of course, is to try and improve the opportunities for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as a whole, and of course to spread that Cambridge wealth, not thin it out, but to spread it across a wider area. The Cambridge economy is being hampered by several things, one of which is extreme house prices, 13 times the average wage. If you want to buy a house in Cambridge, thank you very much. And also a lack of housing development. We're building in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough 5,000 fewer homes per year. So the vision for Cam Metro is very simple. We connect the science parks of Cambridge by going under Cambridge. Please don't be mistaken that we're trying to build a London Underground for Cambridge. That's not the case. But we connect the science parks, we connect the university. We also bring forward new sites for garden towns and create sustainable growth across the Cambridgeshire economy. People talk a lot about the 15-minute city. Well, with world-class public transport in and around Cambridge, we will be able to create a solution where people are no more than 15, 20, 30 minutes from the centre of the city, but also they have the ability to live in exceptional towns and exceptional garden towns. And of course, we also protect the villages and towns of Cambridgeshire from further inappropriate development. The Metro will, of course, bring forward land, it will bring forward opportunity, and it will bring forward further investment. Certainly, world-class public transport delivers growth. There's no doubt about that, but it does it sustainably. The exciting thing, of course, that we're looking at here is because of modern technology, we can do things over a wider distance or over a wider area and in an area and the type of place that's previously previous thinking has been you cannot deliver world-class public transport in somewhere like Cambridgeshire because of size. And modern technology, I believe, challenges every fibre of that thinking. What we're trying to prove in Cambridgeshire is that we can deliver transport that you would expect in a major city of probably 500,000 to 5 million, plus in an area of relatively low population. And it's autonomy that does that, and it's technology that allows us to bring forward the very best system. So we're working with some of the great Cambridge brains, as you would expect. Dr. David Cleverley and Professor John Miles have been working on a technological solution that will mean that tunnels can be smaller and therefore cheaper, and our routes into the Shire can be less harmful to the environment, narrower, and certainly still deliver the solution we need. It's a really exciting project, and it's unusual because the usual thing for government or local government to do is shy away from technological advance and hide behind the fear of failure, and therefore only bring stuff out that's been going and worked on for the last 50 years. In reality, we've had electric metros in the UK since 1905. Are we really saying in 2020 that we can't develop new technology that could be better? And I think post-COVID as well, creating the kind of system that we are aiming to deliver, which would be a system of linked pods, autonomous pods, the ability for example, to completely cleanse each one of those pods between journeys is very simple. You can build that into the technology. So we're listening to world's greatest experts. We are taking into account COVID and the effect on public transport, and we're also trying to make sure that the Cambridgeshire economy stays a jewel in the crown of UK PLC.
The reality, though, James, is, and it's a great project, and the technology is fantastic. The reality is that historically, metros have been comparatively expensive to deliver, and in a time when local authorities, are under the cosh in terms of financing, is it ambitious to think that that kind of investment is right now?
Well, first of all, yes, it's ambitious, and I absolutely do not shy away from ambition. And I know that we have to make sure the right solution comes from Cambridgeshire. I think, and this is where I think we need to change the mindset. When you talk about metros, you're talking about light rail. That's really what you're talking about. And yes, light rail is very expensive. Not only that, it's over the capacity that is needed for this system. If we were to put in a DLR, for example, I'm pretty sure that the hourly capacity of DLR is some 27,000. Even with the growth of the Cambridgeshire economy over the next 30 to 50 years, we still would not need that kind of capacity. So we would be wasting money before we even started. The system that we'll be putting in will give us capacity between 7 and 10,000 people per hour, but also because it is new technology, because it uses battery power, it doesn't need the segregation that a light rail system would need. It can be delivered through the countryside on far cheaper technology than the old systems. And I said, it's 2020 now. We really should be moving on from Victorian technology.
So by Victorian technology, I imagine you're directing that at Rob and his East West Rail, are you? I mean, can the two systems sit hand in hand? Are they complementary, or is it one or the other? Are you battling it out for the money?
No, absolutely not. We're certainly not battling out for the money, and the reality is that the systems will be complementary. Rob's system, fantastic. It opens up a corridor east to west. It solves one or two of our travel to work, or one travel to work route partially. But the reality is, I'm fully behind what Rob's trying to achieve with East West Rail. But effectively, if you're going to dump 10,000 people on Cambridge South Station every day, potentially, where are they going to go? Because currently Cambridge is snarled up. It does not have a road network that's capable, and it doesn't have, therefore, a public transport network that's capable. What the Metro can do, absolutely, you'll be able to get off in exactly the same way you can at King's Cross and get straight onto the Metro and get from where your heavy rail destination to your light metro destination beyond, and it allows more than just complementary. It really makes each system can make the other thrive.
Great. I'm going to part that thought. Rob, I know you want to come back there, but we'll come back at the panel session. I want to hear from a couple of other projects first. Thanks, Mayor James, for setting out a fascinating project. Let's hear now from Lee Galloway. Lee, welcome. Lee is the project director for the A428 Black Cat to Caxton Gibbet Improvement Scheme, a road scheme Highways England's been planning for a while, and just come back from the latest public consultation, I believe, in the summer. Where are we now? What's got to happen next? And how does it fit with the transformation of the region, Lee?
Hi, Anthony. Yes, so as you said, we've just completed around a supplementary consultation during the summer, and heard a few of your speakers talk earlier about how we need to innovate, and certainly for our team, carrying out consultation during that period has been particularly challenging, but pleased as well that we've been able to deliver a solution that's been able to give people the opportunity to engage with the consultation in a new and different ways. So some really good feedback from that work that's been done. And that leads us forward to our application for development consent order, which is due later this year. And that's a key next step in the scheme in order for us to be able to progress towards construction, with construction expected to start in 2022. So we have, as a project, we have a number of works on the ground at the moment. For those in the area may have seen some of those being carried out in terms of informing our application ready for submission. But this, like the other schemes that you've heard from today, is together with the other schemes, this is providing real connectivity to the region. So for our scheme, that's improving journeys between Milton Keynes and Cambridge and beyond. And so the key junctions in this scheme, so Black Cat in particular, I'm sure most people will be familiar with. It's a particular congestion hotspot. And so this is relieving those congestion and providing a reliable journey between those locations. The existing A428 is single carriageway. If you've travelled along it before, certainly in the morning and afternoon rush hour, you'll know that that's no longer fit for purpose. It's over capacity, and that creates a lot of problems for the villages that are located around that area as well. So this scheme will help provide reliability in terms of journey between those locations and provide some relief to some of the villages and the people and communities that sit around the current area of the A428. The existing A428 will also be retained as well, so there will be some local access as well, providing them with an opportunity to still connect with the network. And also further afield in terms of connectivity from St Neots down into and beyond to Cambridge and to Milton Keynes. So some good opportunities there for this scheme to really help connect people across the community.
Thanks, Lee. Certainly, it can be described as something of a Marmite scheme. There's a lot of people who really want that investment, some people who are not so keen. But it seems that progress is being made. We're going to come back to some questions on it in a wee while. We're going to hear from Matt Barber first. Matt is head of partnerships at Sustrans, the cycling organisation, charity, I suppose. Yes, it is a charity. Matthew, tell us about your plans for active travel in the region, and particularly the Varsity Way project.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Anthony. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the Varsity Way. A bit different from the rest of them because it's already there. It's a 124-mile route on the National Cycle Network, which connects the university cities of Oxford and Cambridge. But sort of before we sort of go in and drill into the project, I just want to talk a little bit more about the National Cycle Network because I think it's useful context. And it's been in the news quite a lot. You might have seen just last week it's turned 25 years old, but I think it's arguably had its toughest year since inception. So back in 2015, we actually audited every single mile of the 16,575 miles of the National Cycle Network. And then in 2018, we released our Paths for Everyone report. Some of you may have read it. Some of you may have almost certainly seen the newspaper headlines because essentially we came out and said it's crap. Over 7,500 miles of the National Cycle Network were deemed to be very poor, which means that it's not safe for an unaccompanied 12-year-old to ride on. And then, yeah, fast forward to July of this year, and we've just gone through our first ever phase of removal and reclassification of on-road sections of the National Cycle Network. And so over 19% of the National Cycle Network is now only signed for experienced cyclists only, and really importantly, 4.5%. That's over 750 miles have been removed entirely from our network. And that's due to average daily volumes and average daily speeds of motor vehicles being just too high. So yeah, I don't want to be too negative, but what does this mean for the Varsity Way and it being a transformative project for the Heartland region? So the first thing to say is that some online sections of the Varsity Way have been reclassified. And that means that it's only suitable for experienced cyclists, and that includes sections near Milton Keynes, St Neots, Huntingdon, Bedford. They all failed some of our safety thresholds. And it's important at this point to note that I'm only talking about on-road sections here. There are many off-road sections which are not good enough either. And it's a contrast because I would argue that actually the Varsity Way has one of the best sections of National Cycle Network in the country, which is the guided busway route coming in from St Ives into Cambridge, 4 meters wide, beautifully tarmacked, heavily used. It's a great example of the sort of infrastructure we need. But yeah, as many of you will appreciate and probably think is synonymous with the NTN, there's plenty of bits which are just essentially a farmer's track or a bit of a muddy field. And yeah, that's obviously not good enough. And when we talk about routes, we talk about they're only as good as the weakest point. And so yeah, there are sections of the Varsity Way that don't meet our vision for the National Cycle Network. You know, our vision is a network of high quality, traffic-free paths that connect our cities, our towns, our countryside, and they're used and loved by the communities they serve. But I think the main reason I've been asked to join this call is to actually think about what could the Varsity Way become. And so we were really pleased to see that in EEH's transport strategy, they've recognised that the Varsity Way could become this green spine that runs across the heartland, and it could be a focal point for developing greenways that, you know, sort of spur off that network. So I think there's 2 points to consider here. The first one, I think, is the more obvious point, which is around how would the Varsity Way become this high quality tourism and recreational route. And I wanted to just share 2 examples with you there of similar length routes. So you'd have heard of probably Coast to Coast up in Northern England. You know, that carries over 250,000 trips per annum. That stimulates a spend of over 10.5 million in the route corridor, and that supports 173 full-time equivalent posts. Or the Taff Trail in Wales, in Cardiff, you know, that has over 400,000 trips per annum on that, stimulating a spend of 14 million on the route corridor and supporting 259 full-time equivalents. So, you know, they're two schemes. They've been around for a long time. They're internationally renowned. People come from all over the place to use them. They have a lot of promotion, marketing, media coverage. But I think for us at Sustrans, there are certainly elements of the Varsity Way of linking Oxford and Cambridge that could, you know, there's some beautiful countryside in between. I think there's something there. I think there's something quite interesting there. And then just the last point, Anthony, I wanted to make is, and a number of your speakers have sort of touched on this earlier, including I think it was Sean, and about it being this massive opportunity, and we obviously couldn't agree more. So yeah, we're sort of this broader point around active travel and whether could the Varsity Way act as a bit of a catalyst. You know, active travel, you know, it's never been more prominent than ever, arguably. You know, the gear change report, the new local transport note, the emergency active travel fund. You know, it's exciting times. I think we all know the benefits of active travel. We've all seen the evidence. We all know that there's a huge amount of untapped potential of people who want to cycle more from all walks of life, but they don't because they don't feel safe. So I think there's an opportunity for the Varsity Way. You know, local authorities across the heartland are starting to develop their LCWIPs, which are their local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. This is what DfT are saying they need to have in place to access, you know, significant funding. And these are ambitious plans to actually put in high quality routes to help people walk and cycle. So I think for me, you know, how do we link these emerging local networks into the Varsity Way? Could the Varsity Way become this coherent, continuous, safe, you know, inspirational, nationally renowned, significant green spine running through the heartland that we can all point to and say, this is brilliant, this is what we need more of? You know, that's certainly where my thinking's at anyway.
Okay, well, we'll come. I mean, just very quickly before I move on to questions, we've got here. I mean, there's a lot of money being ploughed into active travel at the moment. Is it being spent wisely, or are we just getting stuck into shovel-ready projects?
It's a good question. I mean, there is, you know, it's nice to see active travel and billions being mentioned in the same sentence, which has not always been the case. And some of you may have seen Grant Shapps in the Telegraph recently talking about some of the emergency active travel fund schemes that have gone in and are not quite, you know, they're not quite as good as they could be. You know, I'd say local authorities have been put under a huge amount of pressure and strain to move very quickly. I think on one side they have to, because, you know, there was this opportunity with, road usage was so low. And a lot of people had taken up walking and cycling during lockdown, and people were enjoying having fewer vehicles and exploring their local environment. So I've seen some good schemes, I've seen some poor schemes, I've seen, unfortunately, I think is often the case, a lot of it's become quite political as well. And that does make the delivery of it challenging. DfT should be making an announcement fairly soon on tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund, which will give local authorities a little bit longer to actually start to consult on some of these and engage the communities. But, you know, for me, the most important point was Grant Shapps, he actually acknowledged, he said, we just need to concentrate on that silent majority. You know, the silent majority do want more walking and cycling. They do want safe, separated space for walking and cycling. And they are willing to do that at, you know,
okay,
that means taking space from motor vehicles too.
A couple of quick questions from the boys. We're running short on time, but I want to get some updates. Firstly from Rob and then from James. Updates, EWR, this is from Owen O'Neill. EWR, when will we be seeing alignments and budgets for the central section, and when will the bad joke of building a new railway that isn't electrified from day one be put back in scope? Rob.
Right, thanks for that, Anthony. Sorry for the dustbin man outside making all the noise. So yeah, thanks for the questions. Owen's close to this project. He knows that we're working closely with DfT and Treasury to get the full go ahead on the target cost for the first part and get that all signed off. We are now working towards our detailed consultation. We've announced our preferred route, as most people will know, and we'll be working towards the detailed sort of development and consultation into next year.
Okay, and a question just going on from Alex Bobbleton. Can we have an update on the local Bletchley to Bedford stations?
Yeah, that is part of the overall scheme. And again, on that one, clearly it's a short railway with a frequent stopping pattern, and we want to look at the solution that actually brings the most benefit to the communities. So we've got to look at station stopping, we've got to look at overall line speed, we've got to look at level crossing. So we're actively considering all of that work now to do that and consult on what will be the best solution overall for the communities, both on that part of the route and on the route as a whole.
Okay, James, what's the next steps with CAM? This is from Tom Seymour. What's the next steps with CAM? OBC for the City Tunnel section to be finalised. Is that on track?
Yeah, so we're working on, we've expanded the OBC actually to include the one CAM, the whole system. What's very, very clear is that you can't build part of a system, you've got to build the whole thing. So that work is ongoing and we'll report back next year. We have set up a special purpose vehicle to deliver the system. We've looked at how other major infrastructure has been delivered across the UK and across the world, and we've listened to the world experts on that, and they've advised us to set up a special purpose vehicle. We are interviewing for the chairman very shortly, and of course once the chairman is in place, the team will begin to come together. We already have got Simon Wright on board, who was involved in the delivery of the transport solution for the London Olympics and in Crossrail as well. So we're looking to the world's experts to deliver this system. It's absolutely on track, and the business case, of course, will take us to the next stage.
Okay. So another question from James and Rob. Cambridge South Station has been specified with insufficient capacity for your plans and will be inadequate as soon as they come into fruition. Are you trying to do something about this? I know you mentioned this, James. James and Rob. James.
Well, Cambridge South Station doesn't exist at the moment, so it's definitely got insufficient capacity as we speak.
Well, it's being specified with insufficient capacity.
But the reality is twofold. It was very important to me that Cambridge South Station came ahead of East West Rail. It was initially specified to come in around 2028. We've brought that back to 2025 or so. That's the ambition. It has government funding from the last budget. And of course, we will be working alongside Network Rail and Rob to make sure that specifications for it are not just right for when it's open, but also that means that when Rob's system comes into it, that it's ready for that as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Rob?
And I just support what James said. I think the premise is wrong, Anthony. We've been looking at that, both the station and the route actually. So we've got to build the station. We've got to make sure the signalling capacity accommodates what James has described and East West Rail as well. So I believe that station and the corridor will be built to the correct capacity.
Can you please talk to communities, not just rail users?
Well, the answer is we're doing that already. We've been out for consultation. We've put ourselves around. We've visited many sort of village halls and local communities. We've done informal consultation online, and so yeah, please, we're talking to you, and we want to hear what you say.
Then Yvette Lamidley says you're clearly ignoring the contribution from Milton Keynes, James.
Am I? I'm not sure I am, to be honest with you. Certainly, I know that there are plans ongoing in Milton Keynes. I'm happy to listen to them, but so far I haven't had any contact from anyone in Milton Keynes with regard to CAM Metro. So
Greg Smith wants to know where he can get more details, more links for your metro. Is there a website?
Well, if he goes onto the Combined Authority website, you'll find the links there that he can get.
So, question from Owen O'Neill again. While interventions, I'll go to Lee for this. While intervention at Black Cat Junction may be a pressing need to reduce congestion bottleneck, won't the 10 miles of dual carriageway on top just induce demand and put on hold incentivized modal shift towards East-West Rail? Lee.
I think the two schemes are looking at kind of different communities in terms of those journeys, Anthony. So I think they're complementary. I think both business cases stand up in their own right. I'm sure Rob will comment otherwise, but yeah, I think this is not about one trumps the other. This is about how we work together as the schemes come together. The Black Cat scheme is ahead of the other two schemes, so yeah, obviously the emphasis there is to make sure that's joined up, and I'm sure everybody wants the same thing there.
Okay, I'll finish with Matt because we are banging out of time. A lot of cyclists, a question here from Rupert Ziela. A lot of cycling we observed in Buckinghamshire was additional trips for leisure rather than mogul shift away from private vehicles. Should we be emphasising access for leisure cycling instead of focusing on work trips? There's another question that says, bring back the local cycle and walking infrastructure plans, from Victoria Jazova. What do you think about this work versus leisure trips, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. Like for me, my focus is I'm really interested in trips less than 5 miles. We know 2/3 of all trips are less than 5 miles. They're the ones that can easily be replaced by walking and cycling. And we need to make sure that we've got the right environment for that to happen. I think it's a fair point that during lockdown we did see a lot of people. You know, they sold 1.3 million bikes during lockdown across the UK. You know, extraordinary numbers of people going out with their families on bike for the first time, and people enjoying that. So I think there is a way to transition that across, and actually evidence shows that people will. You know, it's very different from going for a family ride at the weekend to then saying, actually, I'm going to cycle to work, I'm going to cycle to the shops, or I'm going to cycle the kids to school. But you know, evidence shows that with the right infrastructure, that can happen. But yeah, there's clearly a challenge here, isn't there, as traffic numbers start to increase.
Thanks a lot. We're going to move now to the final section, but before you go, panel, the final section, basically, we're going to be putting Martin Tugwell, Programme Director for the Heartland, on the spot. Any thoughts that Martin should be kind of having in his mind when he plans his way forward for the next year? How does he make sure that the Heartland accelerates forward faster next year than it has this year? Rob.
Two things, and Martin does this already. Make sure we stay joined up as we speak with government, so that we are of one voice, and that we get good support from both Department of Transport and Treasury, who are critical to our success. And then secondly, to log what we four panelists have just said. We're not competing with each other, we're working in a complementary manner to give a really fully joined up connectivity for this arc.
Great. Lee?
Yeah, I think similar to as Rob's described, really, this is the support from England's Economic Heartland is really important to us to keep these schemes on the agenda. So from support from that perspective, and as Rob described, really, it's working together to try and make the scheme something that we can delivers everything that we hope it can.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say. You know, LC whips are the vehicle that DFT want to use to get more people walking and cycling. The local authorities in the Heartland are developing them, but you know, with the new guidance that's come out through the LTN, this is a step change in the funding. It's a move from encouragement to enabling. So anything that the Heartland can do to work with local authorities to bring them together, so we build good quality stuff, all the better.
And James.
Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
Right. Well, thank you very much. On that note, thank you very much for my panel. Thanks, James, Lee, Rob, and Matt. Hope you enjoyed that panel session. Certainly some fantastic transformational projects there, and certainly will make a huge difference to the region when they are up and running fully. So, as I said earlier, we're going to end the session today with some concluding remarks from Martin Tugwell, Programme Director for the Heartland. Martin, you are there. Good. you are there. Excellent. Welcome. Martin, I'm going to do this, I think, as a series of questions. I'm going to pick up, and there's a number of issues which have sort of come up throughout the sessions today. Loads and loads of questions, and I'm always very pleased to see loads and loads of questions. So I'll dip into those as they come in, but if we can tackle maybe 6 questions: COVID, the economy, travel demand, climate change, and innovation and skills. Does that sound like a good idea? If you can just give your thoughts about perhaps what you think is came out to you as being kind of like resonating, and what you want to see different next year. So clearly, since Hearts University last year, a lot of water's flowed under the bridge. Has it driven a stake through the heart of your plans?
Well, good afternoon, Anthony, and also thank you to everybody who's been joining us today for our 4th conference. It's I think one of the things that strikes me listening in throughout the morning has been how in 12 months we've moved from talking about potential to actually, as we heard in that last session, seeing it starting to be realized. We're seeing the commitment to being about implementing the strategy. And indeed, when the political and the business leaders had their initial idea some 6 years ago, it was very much in that focus of getting things done. And I think we'd like to think that the team and the partners are collaboratively doing that. In terms of the change landscape, I think I'd argue that what we've seen in the last few months is almost a vindication of the approach that we had right from the very start. Transport is a personal choice, whether you're a business, whether it's your individual travel. So unless we understand what it is that people are looking to do, and unless we have the mechanisms for understanding how those needs are changing, any transport policy is actually going to be struggling. And if we think about the options, the choices, the challenges that individuals face, we've got to really understand the nature of our population, the requirements of our businesses. And that's why when it comes to our approach, the focus on the user and being really focused on making sure we have an approach that takes into account equality, diversity, and inclusion are absolutely at the heart of the strategy moving forward.
And that's absolutely right. And I suppose, and I think it's you are making some great progress, but the reality is, back to the economy, and this is certainly about driving the economy nationally, but your local authority partners in reality are struggling financially. They're struggling for resources. They've got a huge amount of additional stuff on their plate they didn't have 12 months ago. I mean, how are you likely to recut your cloth as a result of this, these challenges?
So there's 2 things in there, Anthony. One is, as a region, we need to continue to be economically successful, as you heard from Mayor Dave right at the very start of the conference this morning. An economy, if you don't keep investing in it, goes backwards. And we know, as Mayor Palmer and other politicians have said consistently, this is a region which delivers for the country as well as for the residents and the businesses. So it's a challenge we have to rise up to, and we have to continue making the case. The benefit of something like EEH is we're a pan-regional partnership. We are a strategic partnership. We allow the partners to pool their resources and to be efficient in how they put forward their proposition to government. It was really great to hear the Minister welcoming the role of STBs like England's Economic Heartland in supporting and driving forward the economic recovery. We're a small, lean team. We work very closely with our partners. That collaboration that Mayor Palmer was talking about, the collaboration you saw with the delivery partners, that's what's driven us forward. I have to say, it takes time. And it's why, this is our 4th conference. You build those relationships, you build that collaboration over time. And it's a testament to all the partners in both public and private sector that we've got to where we've got to.
One of the other issues, clearly, and you'll obviously, in your role as president of the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation, be doing a lot of work, I'm sure, around this issue and the discussion around changing travel demands, the changing work patterns that we've all got, and working from home now being the new norm for how long we don't know. I mean, how do you see, I suppose nationally, but how do you see from your CHT hat, but how do you see the future locally from EEH's perspective about the future of mass transit?
So mass transit will still have a key role to play moving forward. We heard from Rob Brickhouse there how actually from a project's perspective, East-West Rail is even more important. And if you look at the principles of the transport strategy, what it says is we need to connect our areas of opportunity and our areas of growth, the great drivers of the economy, together. And we need to make it easier for people to do that travel by public transport and mass transport. Once you're there, you need to have the local connectivity, the walking, the cycling, the local public transport that allows you to make that journey, as we heard so eloquently from Lucy and Emily this morning, about how the younger generation, the next generation of professionals are saying, we know we need to change the way we do things. What you've got in the transport strategy is a very powerful framework that allows partners to rally around that single strategic objective, allows us to focus on how we unlock the economic potential, but more importantly, achieve the net environmental gain that Paul Leinster was talking about earlier, as that's at the heart of what we're doing.
Because of that is that climate change issue, the targets of net zero emissions is massive, but it's also there is a risk that it will get left by the wayside as we meet these other challenges. How do you ensure that it doesn't? Because clearly there's a lot of speakers today really making that point that we need to embrace it.
And to be honest, Anthony, that's come through all the conversations we've had in developing the transport strategy. We did our outline transport strategy, which you may recall last year. And one of the most powerful messages coming back from that consultation was be ambitious. That we thought we were pushing the envelope a little bit when we were talking about carbon reduction at that point. But the message back from the region's residents and businesses was be bold and be ambitious. This is too important not to achieve. Now, what I find reassuring is the philosophy of the transport strategy, that focus on what's the user about, the focus on outcomes. What are we trying to achieve here? Means that we've still got that focus and emphasis on delivering the net zero requirement. And look, we're very clear. The 2050 target is an absolute legal requirement. If we can better it, absolutely. And why can't we be ambitious in this region? This region, which is the UK's leading science and technology innovation area, we've got the best brains and the best opportunities within the country in some areas. And one of the underlying principles of our vision is to harness that to deliver growth.
Okay. Finally, innovation and skills also spoken a lot about today. I mean, how are you going to ensure that, given the economic pressures and competition for precious resources, that you in the Heartland make the case for investment and it doesn't go elsewhere in the country?
By building on that collaboration and using the strength of the evidence base that we've accumulated under which we built the transport strategy, but harnessing that vision, being ambitious. What has been doesn't need to be moving forward. We've seen received wisdoms being challenged left, right, and centre. We've heard people this morning talking about it's not about whether you need to travel, it's why do you need to travel? If there's a need, how do we do it differently? So I think it's making sure we keep focused on that, focused on the strategic, focus on enabling things to happen, and then supporting our partners as they bring forward proposals in a collaborative but an aligned way. So you have the investment in transport, with the investment in digital, with the investment in energy systems, if you're actually going to achieve that net zero requirement.
Okay. Before I give you the last word, just to bring us to a rousing close, Martin, I'm just going to we're bang out of time. And with virtual meetings, you have to finish on time because everyone's got another Zoom meeting to go to. So I'm just going to say a few quick thanks to people before I hand over to you to close us out, Martin. But thanks to all the speakers who put a huge amount of effort and a lot of time in to making this happen today. Apologies if we were slightly restrictive in terms of the time, but we've tried to get us through as much as we possibly could. And I hope also that you found it a useful exercise to actually put those together in a very concise fashion. So thanks to Lindsay and Adam in the EEH team and to Paul Wheeler, the conference producer, who once again put together a great group of speakers and navigated, I suppose, the not inconsiderable challenges of making this event virtual. Thanks also to all the people who've put loads and loads of questions, an extraordinary number of questions, and I'm sure that Martin and the team will go through every single one of them and reply in person. Certainly they'll take them all on board. Great questions, and that showed some really fantastic interaction from the 250 plus people that have, well, probably more than that in total that have been with us today. So I hope you enjoyed the morning. Certainly visit the Heartland website for all the details and projects and the themes you heard today. So there's some handouts to download in the control panel on your right. But Martin, close us out. Give us some rousing words to underline the role I suppose you see delegates playing and the role that you see your team playing in the future to take us forward over the next 12 months for the Heartland. Martin.
If I go right back to the very start, Anthony, the Minister in her introduction welcomed our strategy as being bold, ambitious and innovative. It harnesses our inherent strengths as a region, both as individuals and businesses. We have the potential, if we so wish, to make that real. And through the single voice, through the collaboration, we have the opportunity to make it happen now. So I would encourage everybody to contribute to the consultation. 11:59 on the 6th of October is when the deadline for a response is. But more than that, get involved in making a difference and delivering a better future, one that realizes economic potential, but does so by achieving the net environmental gain that we also look for. And I look forward, along with the rest of the team, to working with you on that journey.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. Have a really safe onward journey to your next Zoom meeting or wherever you're heading. Thank you very much. We're going to draw it to a close and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.